And I'll just check YouTube just to make sure it's official. All right, rock and roll, man. You can see everything's still pretty good.
Everything looks good, man.
How's the faction sheet? Okay, first and foremost, for everybody joining in, I want to say thanks for joining. I'm sitting in with probably one of the biggest person behind the second edition, Brian. If you guys can see him, Brian probably is not going to wave back. But that's fine. Brian, welcome to the world.
It's a little bit delayed, so I'm trying to do what I can.
Oh wait, what's delayed? Oh, my speech.
No,
Well,
I
yeah,
think your speech is fine. The video of me, that's fine. I got it different. I think I'm not gonna worry about it. Let's just go ahead.
gotcha. Yeah. So we're sitting down today. The audio is not delayed. So if you're watching the yeah, it's not gonna be delayed. The audio shouldn't be delayed. But we are here, and another thing I could do, Brian, is actually I can just share with you my what do you call it? Just the TTS instead of the actual screens. But then I guess you need to see the actual headquarters for first edition, don't you? That's right.
This is fine, and we probably want to show it to the viewers as well.
Yes. So we're going to be going from faction to faction. The idea is I want to kind of explain to you, well, the idea is we want to sit down and kind of go over, hey, first of all, I'm not affiliated with Company Heroes. I just play the game. I love it. And I played the first edition into the 1.5 into the second edition. And for those that are never played Company Heroes before, you're going to get to see kind of the transformation from first to second. And for those that are coming back for the first edition, you kind of hopefully can see why the changes are made and kind of the benefit of balancing and the reasons behind it. Hence why Brian is here. Brian has been pretty much spearheading a lot of the changes with the playtesting and stuff. He sat in on many playthroughs to the point where I'm wondering if he got bored of it or just I'm annoyed hearing people complaining about everything. And he made a lot of changes. And so that's what we're going to do. It's going to be free flow. We're just going to go over each faction. We have the actual first edition here on the top right for you guys to watch. And then on the TTS, we actually will see the second edition updates to that first edition board. And so we'll start with the British. And the idea is when I first played first edition, the British were originally designed, they only had one infantry squad, as you can see in the first edition here. And it was one of the hardest factions to pick up mid to late game, especially if you didn't have fuel, because the second edition boards were nothing but pretty much emplacements. And so with one infantry unit and emplacements for second tier, you pretty much had to run the third tier as fast as possible to get your tanks out, or you pretty much get screwed. And so one thing that we're going to notice is, and Brian talked about it, is right away for this first edition British board, there's already two infantry units from the get-go. We have the infantry section and the Vickers 303 machine guns to bring that up. And some changes that were made, one was, and Brian, you can chime in whenever you want, was the reduction of cost for the upgrade for anti-tank or sight and range upgrade.
Yeah, let me just interject. I just want to say thanks for having me, and thanks for this opportunity here. I just want to introduce myself. Yeah, basically, I'm Brian Cromwell. I joined Bad Crow Games to kind of help out, to kind of take the lead design role for second edition, and kind of just develop it, take all the feedback, participate with the community, and try to improve the game to be as best as it can be, essentially. So kind of just what Slava here went over. But yeah, ready to go whenever you are.
Yeah.
Start with the infantry section. Yeah, so to start with here, I would just say, kind of as your little note there with munitions, overall, just on the munitions topic to kind of get that out of the way, is that across the board, that was kind of one of the earliest things that we kind of looked into, was trying to bring down the munition costs across the board wherever we could. And a lot of that wasn't, I mean, the obvious is you're just going to get more munitions upgrades, right? That's not the obvious gut reaction to that I imagine everyone's going to have hearing that. But also, not only that, and you would think, oh, that may decrease your choices because, oh, I can just afford everything or whatever, but it actually adds a little bit of nuance as to like what upgrades you want to get first. And very rarely even with second edition, we increased generally how many resources spots there are on the board. But even munitions on most maps isn't too high. They're normally the ones kind of centered on the map, so kind of like more of a map design
Do
thing.
you? Yeah, and
We don't need to really show it quite yet. I mean, we could just this can just be focused on the factions.
yeah,
But that's just conceptually. I'm just trying to give people a little background there. So with that in mind, yeah, you're gonna see like this is kind of one of the biggest ones. Just to touch on the infantry section, more so in first edition,
yeah,
it
which
was
is up here for you
right.
guys.
Yep, up there. You see, it was 5, but even at 5, it was a highly sought after upgrade, in particular for the sight and range upgrade.
Yes,
And and
absolutely.
that and that was mostly what we found in feedback was mostly due to the XP system. So that was it was kind of the design of the XP system, which again I don't want to this not in this one to go too much in depth in that. You can go ahead and answer that question if you want.
Yeah. Oh no, for sure. I was one of the first few people that tried to prove that the British are playable, because the joke was the British have no anti-tank. That really, unless you get to tier 3 tanks, you could not win. Like, it was really hard to. I mean, I'm sorry. The argument was, unless you build a bunch of emplacements, tier 2, you could not win the game. So my goal for the British when I was playing them was go to tier 3 instantly, just to bounce right to tier from tier 2 to tier 3. And I would always go for the sight and range for Brian's reason, just to get the experience points. That's the
Do you
bit.
see? Oops, sorry.
Yeah.
Do
And
you see
that,
that guy's question there?
yes,
I don't
yeah.
know.
And you
Oh,
can
okay,
see it
sorry.
too. Absolutely, yeah.
Yep.
Is this game worth buying, and does it keep you engaged? Well, Larry, we're going over just kind of like the faction layout. I'm with Brian here. He's one of the developers behind it. From my experience, compared to first edition, this is everything about it's different, and we'll kind of go into detail about it. I would recommend getting it if you like World War II, if you like a lot of action, and if you like just a more faster paced, like kind of economy controlled game. What we're doing now is we're going in depth over the factions. I really want to back this game with everything. Yeah, I think knowing what it is gonna be a second edition and knowing playing it, I think definitely get it if you're gonna get it. Do you know what I mean? If you're gonna get a World War II game, I would say it's probably the best World War II game I played. It's just fun. 2 players, 4 players, 6 players. You know, I mean, now it's free for all. There's a lot of good potential here, and the game plays extremely well. So, but thanks for joining, Larry. And if you, we're going over the British faction, the changes, so it's going to be a very dry kind of overview of each faction, the changes that Brian implemented, and I'm just kind of sitting and going through it with the first edition here, and the second edition is on TTS to review.
Well, thanks for watching, Larry. And yeah, if you have any questions, I don't want to show my bias, so obviously that's probably not a question for me. But yeah, if you have any questions, let us know. And if it's more design oriented, I could probably also chip in there.
Yeah. Yeah, and so and going back to that, and so when I was playing the British, you always had to get the sight and range just because of the XP. Because in the old system, you can only get XP for damaging a unit, not for assigning damage. So the infantry faction was really, and because of that, you had no anti tanks in the first edition. So all of tier 1 building, you had no anti tanks, and in tier two, you only had one anti tank option, which was an anti tank gun. So it was really tough for the British to really push against a quick rush. So I agree with you on that, Brian. The reduction in munition helping out.
Right. So now we're actually, for a while, we were seeing at the new 3 cost a lot. I tend to favor the AP upgrade. It really depends on what my opponent's going. I mean, that's kind of the design. So I just kind of want to start, kind of extend the kind of discussion there. Is kind of the design of each and every unit is to kind of have a specific role out of the gate. Like when you buy an infantry section of the British, obviously the generic infantry of every faction, almost every faction's pretty identical, their standard one. But
Right.
then you look at their upgrades, and then you kind of, especially as you start playing that faction, you kind of get a feel for their faction identity. So, for instance, you're going to start seeing it here pretty much immediately for the British. Is their faction identity is generally high health and just kind of lower cost upgrades. And
Mm-hmm.
in addition to that, they have it. You'll see a little bit of exceptions here with a couple units like the Universal Carrier, but you'll kind of have a tendency to see essentially very low damage output.
Hmm.
So their goal is, playing that. Not really. I didn't play them too much in the video game, but anytime I watch them, I mean, their typical style. I played them a little bit, but I wasn't good at them, so I kind of moved on. But their style, a lot of the style with the emplacements and everything, was kind of, I think, what the first edition was going for, especially. And then so playing them, they, as you can kind of compare, you see that forward emplacement, and that was particularly hard, especially as a new player, when to figure out to go that emplacement.
Right.
So, and especially being tier one, it was, I don't want to say it was like a trap option, but it's very hard to determine when you should go that and not. So for sure, so the goal there was actually, that actually isn't gone. It's actually commander ability
Yes,
now.
which I do like that. I did like that a lot.
So anyone that is a big fan of the forward emplacement now can find that on several. It's probably one of the more common commander upgrades, is really to focus on the emplacements, at least on the forward emplacement, to kind of give that option for the infantry, especially as Mortal already kind of pointed out that now they have 3 infantry in their core kit instead of just 1.
Yeah, and like there's some like the Hammer Doctrine. We find that forward infantry there that Brian's talking about, and I do like that. That was a nice change, because them having one faction in tier one. Another problem with the British was they had a hard time controlling the map points with just one faction, because as soon as you lose infantry mid to late game, it was tougher, a lot tougher to recover, because you were so focused in the first edition on just emplacements from my playthroughs. So.
Yeah, certainly. And also, obviously, from feedback, another thing we wanted to address was kind of that game replayability, game variety. So, British having, now that, across the board, if you're playing we kind of say the recommended map size, you have 3 starting infantry instead of 2. Obviously, if you have like a smaller table or something, you want to play a smaller map, you have 2 infantry. But now with the 3 standard, we kind of wanted to really open up some options there. So always, every game is British having 3 infantry sections. Obviously, you kind of lose something there. So now with the Vickers, we kind of wanted to open up. A lot of people might say, "Oh, look, another faction with an MG," and I
Mhm.
kind of understand that at first glance. Like, oh man, you might be watching the video and say, "Oh man, there's a lot more kind of faction similarities," but an actual play, after you play a few games, you'll see that they actually play differently.
Yes, especially with the new second edition rule set where you don't pin everybody. Um, Huge play, and also the fact that I think, if I'm correct, on second edition, all of them have have the sight upgrade from the get go compared to first edition. All machine guns do now, MGs.
Correct. So,
Yeah.
so kind of one thing that you kind of touched on in your kind of your second edition review video was a very key point with machine guns, is that
Hmm.
we were finding they were just in a very, I don't want to say awkward spot in first edition, but I can't think of a better word to use at this point, where they they had a lot of rules and they could pin everything in their arc, but at 2 sight and range, they couldn't really do much on the map to
Yeah.
fulfill that role. And then if they got, like, almost all of them had that sight and range upgrade, I think all of them actually.
Yeah.
So going to 3 sight and range, they were monsters. So it was just kind of this weird dynamic where, kind of with that thing that we went away with second edition, where we want the unit to fulfill its main role out of the gate. So we gave it the sight range, and you're like, oh, that's going to be so much stronger. But now, with the rule change of the pinning just 1 and only pinning during the damage phase, it kind of cleared up a lot of, I don't want to say cumbersome play, but just kind of cleared up the maneuver phase a bit more. And then with the new full game rule, which was formerly the advanced game rules of
Mm-hmm.
Overwatch, that kind of just kind of puts it in a good
Yeah.
place we found where the goal is really, unfortunately, like the video game, to compare it to that, I don't want to compare it too heavily or spend too long on it, but generally in the video game, you have a lot more options with flanking and real time decisions to get precisely, hey, you have so many options to deal with a machine gun. Where in the board game, we kind of wanted to replicate those options. Where in the first
Mm-hmm.
edition, it was kind of like they were fulfilling the role or they weren't. So it was really just kind of an on off where we wanted to really add more options there for both the MG player and for the other player.
Yeah, the player countering it. Brian, Larry is asking, in your opinion, if he has 4 players that play most of the time, what should he back? What would you recommend he fully gets into from the second edition? He's asking. He has a 4-player group. What's the time? What should I back to get fully engulfed in this game?
It depends on how fully engulfed. I would recommend kind of what we have is the 4-player backer bundle, and that is going to get you in the game to be able to pick 4 factions. Basically, you get US and Wehrmacht, and then you can pick 2 others, so you get a choice there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can you also get the legacy map in that bundle, so you get a lot of map options and you get the factions. And at that point, you could say, like, if this is gonna be a game you're gonna play every few months or something, or it depends on how many games you have. If this is not gonna be a game that you want to really dive deep into, that's probably enough for you, to be honest.
For sure.
Because there's definitely a lot of content there. Even now, so we're kind of unlocked some stretch goals already. So now the core boxes are going to be coming with. We're looking at adding a 6th to every faction as kind of the stretch goals we're unlocking early here. And with 6 commanders per faction, that's going to generally be enough for people who aren't playing week in, week out. If you're going to think this is going to be a top game that you're going to play regularly or in a weekly group,
Like we
you
do
may want to
here.
look. Right. You may want to look at more commanders in particular. We have a lot of different options and bundles for that, and different expansions. But it really depends on your level. And then outside of that, I mean, the terrain is really up to you. But I would definitely probably recommend Terrain Pack 1. So that's kind
That's
of
the building one. Yeah, I would recommend that
my.
one a
So
lot
that's
too.
that's got the 9 single hex buildings, and then also it has the flagpoles and the battlefield defenses. So that's I think a nice solid. That's kind of the standard bundle plus Terrain Pack 1 is kind of what I would recommend for most people coming in. If that's something that you want to play 4 players regularly, you should be good to go with that.
Yeah, hope it helps you out, Larry. And I agree with him. For me, it would be the 4-player core set, and then maybe if you're not into cosmetics, I would definitely get the elite. Is it Elite Commander Doctor? Is that what it's called?
So there's elite commanders, which really adds. If you want to get the big tanks, that one's got the big tanks.
Yeah.
And then there's a bunch of small ones. If you see like these small little expansions, if you see a particular tank or something that interests you out of those. And then there's the new one, which is the Lost Brigades, which really adds more kind of like specialty units, I would say, to kind of flesh out the ranks of the factions.
Right.
And it adds the Lost Brigades. Basically, we're calling them building board extensions. That kind of combos with command cards. So that's kind of designed for people who played a bit, and then really like, especially if you're like playing it weekly, I could see a lot of people getting into that. That one's not as hyper focused on balance as much. So like the second edition, the core really wanted to open up all the different units, make it very solid and balanced. Where the Lost Brigades is really for people that want the big splash. Something like, hey, second edition, we tried to make the bigger units. That was kind of feedback. We wanted them to come out earlier across the board, but the Lost Brigades kind of turn it up a notch. Like if you're someone who wants to have things spicy, comboing those with commanders is kind of the cool option that we're trying to really offer players. And that's really the only optional expansion that we have now. So it's kind of we have a solid rule set for core, And then if you're looking for something new, that's kind of what the Lost Brigades is going to be.
Yeah, and that's kind of right here. If you want to look at it, I'm gonna show you just kind of basics, a little sneak peek into the Lost Brigades. It's very nice. When it comes to game dynamics, it's gonna blow it up. But when it comes, if you're learning the game, especially with people that don't play quite often, it might be a little too much for them. Like, but if this is what makes Company Heroes so good. If you want to play a standard game, you can over and over and over again. And then if you want to just add something different in like the Lost Brigades, you can do it, and that adds new units, and that will change the dynamics of the game tremendously. With us, when we were playing with the Lost Brigades, we just, like, my game group is large, and we're always having people that played maybe 3 times, 2 times, at most maybe 6 times. Somebody consistently played it. And so this is going to be, if you're going to play this with your 4 people, get it if you're going to consistently play it. The Lost Brigades, I think, is worth it in that case for sure as well. But, and back to the British we go. Hopefully it helps you out, Larry. I mean, in your quest for what you're looking to get. Another thing,
thanks for your interest. The question, man. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, and then another thing was I did notice that if you notice also the universal carrier, so the munition drop, the MG added on instead of the forward emplacement, which I think is great because the forward emplacement really didn't help the British. It almost hurt them because it made them turtle even more, and this allows them to be a little more aggressive in play. And another thing that I did notice off the bat was you guys reduced the fuel cost of the universal carrier by 1. So it used to be 2 manpower, 2 fuel, as it is right here, and you guys dropped it over to 2 manpower, 1 fuel.
Yeah.
With an experience upgrade that is a now defense dice. Do you know what the reasoning was behind that one, Brian?
Yeah, so that one, it took a couple months, but the main thing that we were seeing and testing even early on in second edition was we were trying to increase the pacing and the ability to get to tier 2 and tier 3. And especially in first edition, we're seeing it and getting a lot of feedback that if you purchased your tier 1 ultralight vehicle, in this case like the universal carrier for British, that had a tendency to make it so that you didn't get to your later vehicles
Correct.
because of the fuel cost. So kind of just thinking of it, we're like, well, we tried to assess it, and you only start with infantry. So we wanted to really incentivize. What about solo? I can touch on that in a second here. And then the universal carrier, right? So that's kind of the standard across the board. And the other big change, there's kind of a lot of changes here. So there's a fuel cost. You'll kind of see, yeah, they kind of had this different layout than every other unit in the game where they didn't have an XP upgrade like you touched on.
Yes.
So that was kind of big too. So we kind of wanted to also across the board really put a bigger focus on transport, which is kind of that, it's kind of that square red with the triangle icon on it.
Which is, and I'll show you on TTS I was watching right here.
So that moved to core on all ultralight vehicles for every faction.
Yeah, and I know that in the second edition, the universal carrier comes out so much more often because, and you hit it, Ryan, because in the first edition, when I was playing the British, the big problem I had playing them was I can skip tier 2 building going to tier 3, but if I build a universal carrier, that's pretty much gonna, because before you could jump from building tier 1 to tier 3 on the first edition, and having 2 fuel and a universal carrier, if you built it, you most likely weren't going to tier 3. You'd be stuck at tier 2. And then because of that, you didn't have the AT support from anything else other than the infantry section. But they normally, I would always get the sight and range. Then you're almost always in the first edition, always banking on the anti-tank emplacements. And universal carrier lose that 1 fuel. Even in the game groups here, you will almost always see a British player bring this out. It was so nice to see it being implemented with the flame upgrades.
Yeah, and then the last thing to touch on before we're kind of like expanding to the second building board. So just to touch on this before we can kind of touch on what you said next with the second tier. The universal carrier obviously getting the defense die. Essentially that kind of sticks with their design philosophy here, where they kind of have that durability, and then the universal carrier kind of gets, you can't really quite see it on either card, but it kind of can give up the capture and transport ability to gain flame upgrades. So this is a very critical. British, I would still say, is still the most difficult to play, which I guess
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really touch on yet. But this really gives them that option where a lot of games, if you're looking to put pressure on a specific spot of
Yeah.
the opponent early game, it's kind of, especially against infantry or other emplacements, because flame does well into that as well, and other light vehicles. So universal carrier becomes kind of a jack of all trades of that early game pressure if you want to invest your munitions in that direction, but you kind of lose that durability, and you're probably looking to trade it mid game for a
Mm-hmm.
value trade if you can. But that's kind of the role of that. So yeah, if I'm ready to, I kind of want to touch on quick what you touched on next. But first, let's answer that solo question.
Yes.
Um, so there was a lot of changes in solo. It's probably, to be honest, one of kind of an early tough decision that we kind of ran into, where we had to make a big decision. What did we want to do based on the feedback? Where we had just one faction, a lot of the most common feedback was, hey, can you have more factions? I want more variety. And there was some other critical feedback too, like players who were looking for essentially it to behave differently if it can, and just I think overall just the responsiveness of it and what it was trying to accomplish. I don't want to discredit Riley. I think the original designer, I think he did a fantastic core design, which is it largely is the same in terms of the core. I just kind of came in and I just set up some goals with it, and the biggest goal with solo was for it to actually play the victory points on the board
Mm-hmm.
rather than just be a timer, which for someone unfamiliar with the game, that might not sound that big of a deal, but in play, it actually, in my opinion, kind of is a teaching tool now for making a player better at the game as you kind of advance up from the beginning to the intermediate up to, if you can make it up to the higher difficulty commanders, like you could tell basically someone's skill level as to what commander level they're able to defeat now, because generally the AI will have more units than you, but you kind of have the advantage as a player of knowing how to precisely react, if that makes sense. Like as you learn to
Mm-hmm.
become a better player now, especially with the AI, like the AI, I'd say that as kind of part of that victory point change, kind of takes advantage of the new assault rule. AI will assault you, especially at critical points, so they'll compete for those victory points. They'll throw units on there to try to take them from you and to defend them more. So that it just plays a little bit more aggressive and reactive, but yet will keep a focus on the victory points. So we're hoping that that kind of like I'm not much of a solo gamer myself, to be honest,
Right.
but this is one that I kind of, if I don't have someone and I have some downtime, I'm definitely want a copy of this and want to play it time to time. And that's coming from someone who generally thinks of gaming as kind of a social experience, and yet I would still reach for that to play it solo. So
Yeah, and another thing, Larry, and you please, Brian, tell me if I'm wrong. You can take that solo game, and if you're playing with three people, use it as a fourth player, as a buffer for somebody who's playing by themselves, and still play PvP with that solo modular. Am I correct to say that, Brian? Or am I?
Yeah, right. So that's kind of a secondary kind of, if you will, goal with it, is that I know a lot of people want to maybe shy away from that, and then maybe they'll, some people just like free for all and stuff. But if you have that odd number of players, this once you're like, if you played one game with the solo AI, and after about 2, 3, 4 rounds into it, you should be familiar enough with it where you're able to kind of just break it out in those, typically I'd say those like odd number player games, and just fill in with it. And you could choose the commander difficulty that's kind of appropriate to the table level. So if you're a beginner, you could choose a beginner one to fill in or an intermediate one to fill in very easily. And it's really designed, once you know it, it just kind of is very plug and play. So that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of the goal with it, is really to offer those options. And also kind of touching on it, fairly late in development, we kind of also, it's, I think it's called the Solo and Fog of War expansion now. So we kind of
Yes.
designed a Fog of War light mode where it's kind of an alternative mode to the main game mode that some people are probably going to be interested in. And I just want to touch on it quick and say that it kind of gives you that option to play, like if you wanted to cut out kind of the supply phase, because you're actually kind of playing as an AI commander, but it cuts the game time in half. So if you're looking for, like, you love the core mechanics of Company of Heroes, or it sounds interesting to you, you like the combat, you want that fog of war, you kind of gain the fog of war, you lose a little bit with your supply decision making, but it cuts the game time in half. So it kind of gives you that option that just comes included with the solo expansion right out of the box. So not only do you get the 5 factions, which is the bigger, also probably the biggest change, like I said, with that, we're trying to offer it to just kind of, again, it's unfortunate that, first edition backers, we understand that, hey, look, that was a standalone product, but everything was updated for this. It's really a new product. So
Right.
that's kind of, it isn't just the same. It's really just a lot more components. There's 250. We're actually looking to do acrylic tiles. They're kind of like
I seen that.
they're kind of like cards, but I had some samples sent to me, and they're kind of like cards that you could fully bend. They just snap back into place.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, it's plastic, so it's like waterproof. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it kind of gives you that other option there.
Yeah, for me, I mean, it's kind of strange, but like I have the first edition for solo, and I don't understand the complaint of, hey, we want this one for the first edition. Because in the first edition solo, it was just one faction, and it wasn't really that impressive. So I understand, like, hey, there's an upgrade pack for the factions because they're updated, but like, I agree with Brian. It's a whole different game from what it sounds like. It's a whole different expansion to the game. So I gotta agree with you on that one, Brian. I don't know why people are saying that. Why they want the
Well,
best.
I mean, it's understandable. Everyone kind of, you invested in the game. It's
Mhm.
understandable. We try to understand and respect the backers. I mean, we're very appreciative of our backers. So, we try to do as much as we can. And there's sometimes just tough decisions like that where it's like, there's not really a easy fix to get it to where we could kind of just offer it as an update pack or something, or include it in it. It just wasn't really. We kind of had a monthly, multiple discussions over a month, like what can we
Right.
do with it, and it just didn't look as a great option for us, unfortunately. So we tried to instead just turn into the best product, that try and again hit that feedback that people were looking for. So
Yeah, and I
just did the
appreciate
best
that.
we could there. Yeah.
And honestly, I'm so much happier you guys are going with the newer version of Solo Fog of War, because from me who had the version, I'm actually want to get the newer version. You know what I mean? It's like, thank goodness they're not sticking with the old. They're actually redesigning what needs to be done to make it better. That I'm so grateful for. Do you know what I mean? So it's like awesome on my end. Yeah. So back to the British, and I know Brian, we're talking about a little bit and if, as you notice, me and Brian talking British, a lot of times I keep referencing the tier 2 board for the British, the building 2. And the reason why I mentioned it so much, because in the first edition, the second building was so important. That's why if we're talking about the British, we always have to talk about the second billboard in the first edition.
Yep. So
and
just to interject a little bit, can we just flip that over for a second?
yes, let's flip that over.
Or is it over on the? It might be actually on your third. It actually is technically, I think, on the back of the third building card of first edition.
Yes. Oh,
So
okay, back here.
the one that you have in the top right. Sorry, the third tier. So the one you're showing from your first edition copy on the screen, not in TTS.
On the screen right here. Yep.
Yep. So if you go to the back of the third.
Here we go.
Yep. So you'll see there, Slava kind of already touched on it there, but you kind of see center bottom. There was an option for both British and US to skip tier 2. And while this was very unique and it was very interesting, it was very hard to tune to the right degree. So we kept it for several months in second edition. And even with kind of Slav was already touching on kind of some concerns that he had with the second basically the second building board for British. But even we noticed it with US that no matter how good these units were and how impactful they were, if you went them, it was, especially with the new resources, so easily able to just skip it with
Yes.
both these factions. So it was kind of a really cool idea and concept, but in reality, it was just too hard to find the right level where it was actually added complexity and kind of a lot of analysis for a new player that was kind of overwhelming, to be honest,
Hmm.
because I think in team games, yeah, you can just easily skip it, but especially in 1v1s, even with the new units and the new balance, you kind of had this tough decision that you didn't really know the impacts.
Right.
So yeah, it was a cool idea, but you couldn't really see the impact. So we just cut that out and kind of as the last little thing, as you kind of removed that card already,
Yep. I'll bring it
a little
back.
bit for the tiny little thing, you'll notice that in the bottom right now, it was 2.5 the standard fee, and it was 2.6 like I touched on, but even still 2.5 now you can kind of see on TTS here we reduced the cost for all tier 3s by 1 fuel. So
Hmm.
that's, again, it's little steps here and there, multiple angles. Universal carrier costs 1 less fuel, the tier 3 building unlock is 1 less fuel,
Yep.
there's generally more fuel capture points on the map. So that's kind of how you start to see these pieces coming together of how we get these tier 3 units out, the vehicles out in general, a little
Hmm.
bit more earlier, and for them to have a bit more impact.
Yeah. And when I in the first edition when I played the British, I would do everything I could to skip tier two, just because if like Brian, you touched on the point. If I can go to tier three and skip tier two, why wouldn't I? It was just 3 more fuel, but I can get a tank out in a round or two. So I did in the beginning. Had a lot of pushback. I didn't really like the fact that we could skip the tier two building because I was always fighting for the tier three jump. But it made sense the more I played and the more other people played, especially newer players, where it was a lot less confusing for them and they could actually go with the flow of the game. So I think that was a great addition and great update to the British in that sense there.
Yeah. Sometimes there's addition by subtraction, and sometimes that's hard to maybe grasp without seeing the parts moving in play or a few games in. But that was
Right.
kind of one of the goals.
And Larry, congratulations, man, on that back. Hopefully it is what I say it is, and hopefully you enjoy it as much as we do here. Yeah, and now the one thing is about the British, which and building two was, I think, well, for the British faction, it was another thing that needed to be done. For the second building here, I'm really happy they did this change here, because in the first edition, it was just emplacements. So the British kind of got stuck using their. You kind of had to balance the game of placing buildings down to protect against tanks, and then also capturing points at the same time. You're always just balanced in this game. And in the second edition, they actually gave you a portable anti-tank gun, because if you didn't place the emplacement on the anti-tank guns properly on the map, any other player that you're playing against, they can just avoid you. Any kind of even light vehicle can really devastate the British players. And I do like the change you guys made here with making the AT no longer a replacement, but a 6-pounder anti-tank gun.
Right. I mean, that's a great place to start here. So this is probably one of the biggest building board changes at in the game at first glance, and really even more so when you get into the details of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it does start with the AT gun. So we were kind of finding this kind of, I don't want to say abusive strategy, but there's probably not a better word for it, with the anti-tank gun emplacements, where players would, to kind of use them quote unquote optimally, players were charging their infantry sections across the board.
He's talking about me.
Maybe there's an example of this happening with from some player in this discussion. But and then building these AT gun emplacements near the enemy base, because they spawn forward next to your infantry when you purchase them. So then you could kind of just put them near the enemy base, and frankly, it was a very good strategy, but it was kind of probably a little bit unfun for both players. Obviously, your opponent a little bit more so. So it was in an odd spot, to say the least. So now the anti-tank gun in general for British, touching a little bit more on that now, moving away from the emplacement
Mm-hmm.
comparison per se. There's still, we'll touch on a little bit, is that there's a 17-pounder commander upgrade that's on a few different commanders. That's kind of the iconic British emplacement. We can touch on later a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to swing to it too much now. But now coming in, that helps differentiate the two. It's because you'll still have that emplacement option as a late commander tier upgrade for British players that really love that emplacement. It's actually British's best anti-tank option in their faction.
Mm-hmm.
So I really wanted that to be stand out. Where the 6-pounder, we were looking for a different role in general. You can kind of see, maybe if you scroll a little bit to the left and see both tier 1 and tier 2 and zoom out
Yeah.
a little bit in TTS. So this is kind of what you're kind of focusing on as your core standard for British now. And you'll kind of see, kind of what you're touched on a little bit, you'll see 3 infantry options. So you'll just see a lot more as you kind of walk through the commanders and your options and different things you could do. You can start putting, pieces of this puzzle together, and like I said before, probably one of the harder factions to pick up.
Mm-hmm.
Where, hey, now I have these units that, with a new and forward emplacement, you can actually spawn infantry adjacent to that forward emplacement. So now these infantry can get right out in the front line, and that's kind of British's standard model now, where
Mm-hmm.
they don't overwhelm you with damage. They kind of just overwhelm you with health bars, if you will, just a lot of
Yeah.
health and durability. And their goal is really, as a faction identity, general plan with them is just build up your numbers. Don't get anything wiped. Keep your stuff on the board.
Right.
Secure locations. Don't overextend. So you kind of see that theme through basically their core options here. And the 6-pounder doesn't look too enticing, but you'll start to see kind of one design element of the second edition is we wanted every faction. You kind of see a little bit different with British here with their emplacements, but we wanted to have one infantry option for every faction that was a tier 2 unit that cost 3 manpower.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a great option for British, where it's kind of a little bit close to the OKW's Rakettenwerfer, which we'll touch on later.
Yeah.
But this one's designed to have, the Rakettenwerfer is a little bit more of a specialty unit, but here we have a little bit of a variation of it, where the Rakettenwerfer has the special ability where it can enter buildings, but like most most AT guns and mortar teams, this one can't. So it makes up for that with also having a lack of damage, but it has that 4 range
Right. Yeah.
and 4 health.
Yeah, and then the first edition actually, the anti-tank gun, and actually in the first edition only had 3 range. So and what Brian's talking about in the first edition was, I, as a British player, if I ever went tier 2, I would just push as fast as I can to the enemy spawn point with the sight and range upgrade, hoping to pick up XP, and I would just place Bofors right on the spawn point, and any player had a hard time getting out of that. And then you just place anti-tank guns. You know what I mean? So I do like this because if you didn't do that and the second player went to tier 2, tier 3, start bringing out light vehicles, tanks, the British would fall behind if they didn't do some kind of aggressive play in the first edition. And this was huge. Having a portable anti-tank gun allowed you to not have to be stuck rushing as fast as you can. You can actually play it that way, which is a great design, man. And another thing I did, which we did notice, is that anti-tank gun actually starts weaker. It only has 1 anti-tank damage instead of 2. In the first edition, it had 2 anti-tank damage. But here you can upgrade to give a second anti-tank damage. It gets an extra range long term, but 1 less anti-tank damage.
Yeah, so to touch on that quickly, AT guns in general, overall they were just underutilized in first edition.
Yes.
And I don't really want to say that was a player issue. It was really just with the pacing of the game, with getting your anti-tank gun out there and in position. It was a little bit harder, not really just for British, but factions overall, for getting their anti-tank guns in the proper position to get value from them. So that's kind of a big change. You'll start to see here where a lot of, you want to call it range inflation perhaps, where ranges were increased on certain roles that were kind of underutilized, and this is kind of the key one to mention here. And then also to stick with the kind of the British design here is kind of that lower damage, higher health. You kind of see it on the Vickers too, that can
Yep.
get a health upgrade, where both of their weapon teams have a speed die. Their damage isn't fantastic, but it's really that kind of higher health for manpower cost and the speed die. So it kind of makes up that British basically has that option where, in maybe perhaps a later video when perhaps if we do one about touching about the operations deck,
Hmm.
you kind of British has a lot of choices there as well, more so than other factions based on their playstyle. So it's kind of again why the British have such a high ceiling, and yet their floor was lowered to make it a lot more playable, as Slava touched on.
Yeah, and I mean, in the first edition, I know either you everybody would, if you're gonna play a competitive game in the first edition and you wanted to win, you pretty much would not play the British. I mean, it's kind of like don't play the Soviets or play something else. Don't play the British because the British were just too like linear. You know what I mean? And here, it's hey, if you're playing the British, it's going to be a good game, and that's what I really like. Like you guys, these changes where you can make like the AT, the 6-pounder, having a second infantry unit. You know what I mean? With 3 infantry spawns. Now you can go 3 infantry sections or 2 Vickers infantry sections. It's just like man, so
Yep.
good, so good, so good, man.
Yep. So there's actually a lot still here. I know this might be one of the longer ones, but it was probably because this faction really needed, kind of like your touch on, needed a larger overhaul than a lot of the other factions. And it also ties into kind of I touched on a little bit with the 3 manpower cost, which doesn't look different from the first edition. But in general, you kind of look at that first edition and you see all the same cost, which may
Right.
stand out to you. And again, the same munitions upgrade, the same cost.
Yep.
So that leads to another thing, another kind of bigger goal, a second edition, as we can touch on through especially the other factions as well, is that the different manpower costs and the different fuel costs for the units, just the varying of that to give you
Hmm.
options, to give you strategic resource options of when do I save, when do I spend. British in general actually have one of their strengths here is that lower manpower costs versus other factions. But again, they're going to have struggle to secure those kills of the enemy team's units. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the trade-off there, that you have to be willing to play a little bit different style. And the trade-off, you get a lot more flexibility with survivability. So
Yeah. It's yeah. Good point there.
I want to touch on next the mortar emplacement. Obviously, that's
Yes,
going
this
down the
had
card.
huge changes, man. It went up 1 cost in fuel. I'm gonna quickly mention the changes for you guys that are watching. 1 cost in fuel. It had actually had its HE upgrade added and a defense dice added. And now, so those were pretty much the XP and munition costs in the first edition. Pretty much you're given for free. And now for 3 munitions, you can add camouflage, and then for 2 experience points, you can add splash. And and just a reminder, everybody watching, if you do notice these red dice symbols now, that's another change for 2.0 edition. All emplacements now need to be set up and packed up to fire. So just I just want to mention that.
That's a great point to touch
Yeah.
on. Yeah.
So, which is nice because it really also adds a lot of flavor. So that was what the changes that quickly I just went over them, and then you want to get in depth about why the changes there for the mortars.
Yeah, so the mortar in general, I played a lot of British for quite a while, and seeing other people try to like it took me when I played first edition, it took me about 5 games with British to even be competitive. And again, it might have been weaker perhaps. I felt like you could find their strengths if you played them a certain way, kind of like you touched on. Perhaps is one way to play them, but there were a few ways to play them. But the bigger thing you kind of ran into was kind of looking again at the first edition board. You kind of see a comparison. You already touched on a little bit directly about the mortar, but comparison with the Bofur, it kind of became a very tough argument as to why you would even get the mortar.
Right.
HE was we went through HE balance the changes with, again, we'll try to keep that out because there was a long discussion there. But that aside, looking at just the high explosive damage for the HE damage of the mortar, and then the Bofur starting with 2 AI right out of the gate, generally you would look for these emplacements early game to deal with infantry. which again, the mortar emplacement isn't really. I mean, that's kind of what it does as well.
Yeah.
So it was just heavy overlap there, where kind of like I touched on now with the new costs, we wanted to really differentiate the feeling and the play style and the decision making there with these two emplacements. What style do you want to go for? So as you can kind of see now with the second edition, there's just so much more dynamic between. Again, you kind of still need to reference the first player board here, the tier 1.
Yes.
Because there's just so much more dynamic kind of in those bottom 4, if you will, the bottom 2 on each board, just those 4, learning when to go which of those 4 and where. That's kind of where that ceiling of British comes in, because the Vickers, again, doesn't have the damage but can do the pin. The Beauforts doesn't have the pin, but you can cheaply upgrade for the damage if you place it in a good spot. And then, the Universal Carrier is kind of like an all-in aggressive style. You can hunt stuff down. And then the mortar emplacement is kind of that bigger investment, but you really have to find the right spot and the right time to go for that. So there's a lot of decision-making now where it's not just obvious, hey, every game I just want to go this. There is games where I find myself, depending on your style, like if you want to go defend a side of the map but not play aggressive on it, you might just send a Vickers over there to stop an enemy infantry from capturing a key victory point. Whereas a Beaufort lets you to try to not only keep someone off, but kind of prevent an assault there if you're going to be aggressive on a side. Or Mortar can kind of give you that long-range support. And like I said, Universal Carrier can hunt things down. So there's just a lot here to kind of unpack as you learn this faction. So that kind of like wraps up there. And the goal of that design, and this kind of core now, this deep analysis was kind of obviously done not only for British. It was probably done obviously at a higher level for British to kind of really open them up. But it was done on every faction. I mean, we kind of really wanted every unit to really have its place in the game. So
yeah, and that's I like it. Every unit, exactly, man, exactly. And the Beaufort for the Beaufort spamming, the Beaufort spamming. It would be the Beaufort in the first edition with the forward emplacement, and you could just creep. But yeah,
there was that.
Yeah.
One last little. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Brian. I mean, speak.
I was just say the last little note I have really on the British emplacements in general is kind of, you'll see that standardized that 4 health and a defense die, the forward emplacement as well, the 17-pounder. That's kind of, again, their identity, even with their emplacement. So not only their infantry, but their emplacements have that durability.
Right.
But they're kind of, their bang for their buck is really in their durability, not as much in their damage numbers out of the gate. Especially looking at that Beauforts, you see 2 manpower and only 1 damage, and you're like, what's the role of that? Well, the role of that is to really open up options. Hey, do I just drop a cheap little Beaufort on a point to capture at the beginning of next supply phase? Or, that's kind of a great spot for it, because 4 health and a defense die is formidable in terms of having to, what do I deal with that to try to take it out?
Yeah.
So again, it kind of plays to the British's options.
Yeah, and just for people that are watching, just all emplacements, anything with purple health can capture points. So when Brian's saying you put them on a point, that means these things would capture the points in the following round that they're on. So
exactly, yeah.
Forcing the opponent then having to destroy it before they can recapture the point. So that's where a defense dice Beaufort on any kind of resource point, yeah, it might not be doing a lot of damage from the get-go, but man, you'll let you hold a point for a while, causing your opponent or the whole entire team to figure out how to respond to it. And they normally have to respond with something that has at least 1 anti-tank damage to even get a chance of getting through because of the defense dice there, which is a really nice setup there.
Right.
And that's the first 2 boards of the British. And the third board is the board I like the most, the building board, which was the tanks. So when I played the British, I would always try to push for tier 3 tanks. And it from the get-go, if you just look at it, tier 2, tier 3, it does not seem like a lot's changed. But if you actually really look at the little things that were changed, you realize there were big changes in really good ways. So I'll zoom over here for the third tier 3 building here. I'm starting with the Cromwell. If you're playing the first edition, the Cromwell was pretty much the go-to tank. Even though it wasn't the best at infantry damage for me, it's like I'm rolling 4 anti-tank dice. I might as well use it. You know, I mean, there's still a chance that I can hit a unit. But it was their only, like, one of their best responses to any kind of tank damage units in the first edition. In the second edition, it became, you could clearly see it's a much more versatile unit. And I'm just gonna guess here, Brian. The idea was the Cromwell is like your workhorse for the British when it comes to getting a tank out, to be like versatile in all things, but not the best in one thing. Am I correct to assume that, or am I wrong there?
Well, I don't want to say you're wrong.
You
It's
can say
just
I'm
more.
wrong.
I wouldn't say you're wrong. I would say it's a little bit more of like a situation where the British tier 3 is a little bit more of an onion, where again it kind of sticks with that faction identity of kind of being that higher skill ceiling to really get great at. Because you're gonna see different than most factions. You're gonna like pop out when you see this. Oh man, how different is the Cromwell from the Churchill? Um, and I mean, we can get into their specific, obviously, changes later, but to get into this just as the get go is kind of lay the groundwork here.
Mm-hmm.
The second edition, the Cromwell and the Churchill, we wanted them to each have a specific scenario and role when you'd want to go that.
Okay.
So kind of like you're touching out, like kind of what you're touching on. Again, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. It's a good workhorse. The Cromwell is a great workhorse, but its role is a little bit different because a lot of factions, for instance, you'll see it in a few other factions, they kind of have a better anti-tank, kind of like a tank destroyer out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Where the Cromwell, now getting into a little bit more detail here, from first edition to second. First edition, it was kind of shoehorned a little bit. We had a lot of feedback, of course. It was kind of shoehorned into this scenario where the Cromwell, because of the other tanks, was kind of stuck as kind of their tank destroyer.
Yep.
So that's kind of where it was just awkward, because both from the video game and historically, it was this like obviously historic. It was more of that workhorse tank kind of design, but it was kind of the first edition decision of kind of sticking with that other faction design philosophy and mentality of, hey, look, we have an anti-infantry with the Centaur.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of have that standard universal Churchill that can do decent against both. So then the Cromwell must be their tank destroyer because they have 3 tanks. What else can we do here?
Right.
Where we kind of went in a different direction with British, where we kind of leaned into that historical aspect and kind of like what you would expect from both a video game and kind of historically. British kind of just had different kind of a different doctrine overall in their style. So
Mm-hmm.
we tried to lean into that. And with some feedback, I think there was actually a rapid period where there was 4 or 5 quick attempts at getting that Cromwell in the right spot. It was within I'd say less than a month, probably like 3-week period, where they went through 4 or 5 quick changes where, okay, let's test it. Is it right where we want it? No. Let's tweak it a little bit. No. So the goal here was trying to do what the British was, I feel like, historically trying to do with the Cromwell, where they kind of wanted it to be the Comet with the bigger
Mm-hmm.
gun, so that we still wanted that option there for the Cromwell through the munitions upgrade, as you can kind of see in second edition here,
Yep.
which was kind of, again, what this first edition was trying to do, perhaps. But now to expand that to be a little bit more historically accurate with, okay, it was actually one of the faster medium tanks, so it actually starts with a speed die. It kind of lacks in firepower, so only
Mhm.
1 AP and 1 anti-infantry, but then it also has a second speed die upgrade. So you'll kind of start to see an identity here where, wow, 2 speed dice on a heavy tank. If I say it's medium, that's kind of the class of heavy tanks in terms of the board game. We call them heavy tanks,
Yeah.
and heavy vehicles and light vehicles. And light vehicles are yellow hearts if you're new to the game. Where you see these red hearts, they're heavy vehicles. So if you hear me say medium tank, it's because that was actually the weight class of the essentially the tank in historically that was what it was called.
Uh-huh.
So it's a heavy vehicle there, but it's kind of that fast medium weight tank that kind of has a different role. And we kind of tried to focus it into that role of, hey, can quickly get around the battlefield, offer British kind of that option where, yeah, you can rush one out to help a weak side or something, or to go deal with a threat they're having trouble with. So the mentality there is kind of those approaches.
Mm-hmm.
We're comparing it with the Churchill. So the Churchill, we are finding, first of all, I don't want to spend too much time with the slow change, but the slow change was just a quick touch on it, was to simplify it. Now, slow units, it's typically these heavy tanks.
Yeah.
They can only use 2 command points per round now. It's simplified them from first edition. But now to counteract that, we found, well, hey, the Churchill wasn't really getting used in first edition. It was very hard to use, even with
Right.
the old slow rules and the new ones. It's not. It just has a different kind of role, to be honest. It was kind of that push forward, break through the enemy
Yep.
lines kind of tank, both historically and that's kind of what the design was, obviously in the video game as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we tried to replicate that, and that's kind of what the role is. So like Cromwell's more of like a hunter tank, if you will. It's kind of a support tank of getting in to a critical spot on the board, whereas a
Yep.
Churchill, different from most other factions to have this as a core option, really is designed to kind of punch through with this big health bar with the defense die option of the upgrade to really come in, especially for its cost
Yeah.
of 3-4. Now you kind of see this actual standard across the board where what I'm calling the medium class, kind of this kind of more of this standard tank that's got both armor piercing and anti-infantry. You kind of see its first
Mm-hmm.
edition was to increase the manpower cost and decrease the fuel. Again, a lot of that was on that effort to kind of get these options out earlier in the game. So yeah, you might reach for that Cromwell, but for nearly the same cost, you can get that Churchill out that arguably has, like, if you know where you want to send it and you know where you want to kind of like an enemy strong point and you want to like get in and assault it, that's kind of the tank you want to go for. So as
Mm-hmm.
you're learning British, you can kind of see that, especially if you can get that Churchill out early with that 3 range, it can
Right.
attack 5 range from your spawn at the end of the first round to hit the battlefield. So it can get out there and throw out some decent damage at a pretty good bang for your buck, and it's probably gonna survive whatever the enemy has in that area.
Yeah, and that was a tough call with the Cromwell in the first edition was you needed it for anti-tanks, but the Churchill was too slow. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, we have the same range. I understood the Cromwell was slower, but if you're going to do tank for tank, the Cromwell was always kind of like, hey, this thing moves pretty much 2 extra hexes, and it does 1 more extra anti-tank damage with upgrade doing 2 more. So it's like so much more stronger. In the second edition, I'm finding that, you know what I mean, the Churchill does get used, but the Cromwell is such a great tank hunter in the second edition. I remember we were playing was it 3v3, and one of the British players had a Cromwell with the double speed dice, and the opponents had what is that called? Is that the Yak Panther? Is that the massive tank for the I think it's OKW? It doesn't churn. Yak, is that the Yak Panther? It's like
There's both the Yag Panther as well as the Elephant, but
the
both of them
elephant, the
are.
elephant, the elephant. That's what it was. And the Cromwell just kept going around him because you have to churn the elephant, and it's slow too. And the Cromwell player was able just to like, it was just perfect. It's just like it's seen as like, man, this guy's playing it so well. It was just, but it wasn't doing a lot of damage in the second edition, but it was making an elephant tank really have to like not do what it wanted to do because of that. So I really like that change. Is the Cromwell? If I'm correct to say the Cromwell is the fastest now heavy tank in the heavy health tank in the game with 2 speed dice?
It's one of the rare ones that has both 2 speed dice and 4 health. The Wolverine for the US is more of a tank destroyer, but
Mm-hmm.
at 3 health it is a lot more susceptible to getting in to a position where it's very vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
if you're not protecting it and overextend with it. Where the Cromwell does kind of what you said, it's kind of excels at that role of kind of getting in there, even though it only has 2 range. It can
Correct.
kind of get in there, circle units, it can actually take a hit usually and survive. That first round usually. So it has a little bit more survivability. You wouldn't think 3 to 4 is that big of a deal, but it really is in this game. That's
It's
kind of the
huge.
thresholds the difference between 3, 4, and 5 health, especially on tanks, is pretty big.
Yeah, it's so huge. And if I'm memory serves correct, does Wolverine have +1 range as 3 range, or is it?
Yeah, Wolverine starts out of the gate both cheaper and with more range, but has less health.
That's yeah.
Has a speed die, and it
It-
has 2 AP out of the gate. So it is the Wolverine in terms of bang for your buck still threatens good damage out of the gate. But when we get to the Wolverine, we can expand on it more because I think that was in a very strong spot in first edition, and for much of second edition testing, it was in a great spot. We can touch on more of that later, though.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
they definitely do a little bit different roles now in how they play. So moving on to the Centaur,
Yes.
it kind of suffered again from that same fuel problem as you kind of see in first edition. You kind of see that 4, 4, 5. So it became a tougher unit to get out when you wanted it, when you needed it, where you needed it. Where this 3-2 now, so one kind of thing that you're gonna see as you're perhaps playing a few games of second edition, that there's the philosophy with the additional resources, with the earlier vehicles, with the more fuel on the map, etc., is that fuel is just a timer. It's not as much of a squeeze as it was in first edition.
Mm-hmm.
So in this way, it's a little bit different than the video game, and that's mostly because manpower is implemented just like the other resources in the board game, where it's just standard accumulation. Where the video game had it had a more digitally implemented scaling manpower based on how it's kind of a comeback mechanism a little bit in the video game, where if you lost a lot of units, you'd have more manpower. So here, the Centaur, what this does with this 3-2 manpower, or sorry, the 3 manpower 2 fuel now, it allows you to really do an aggressive opening where you can actually rush tier 3, rush out a Centaur, and or like even later when you're low on fuel, you can kind of get them out earlier now if you plan for it. Yeah, the manpower cost is more, but because the fuel is lower, you can kind of squeeze them in when you really want that anti-infantry option, especially looking at that XP upgrade for anti-infantry. Just
Yeah.
that label, like if you're having trouble with an infantry in a building, an MG in a building, just anything, you just want to come in and mop things up. It also has strafing fire out of the gate now, so you can target 2 adjacent units. We actually saw this in action. I think
Against
actually
me.
against
It was against
you.
me. Yeah, I
It
had
was.
2 fully upgraded Volks Grenadiers, fully upgraded. I mean,
So what does it? Just 2 adjacent infantry can target. So it's kind of one of the more unique abilities in the game because it has that double barrel. So it's just a very unique, cool unit that if you can take advantage of, it just again something that the British doesn't really have out of the gate, something mobile, anti-infantry. So as you kind of put these pieces together with British, kind of to wrap it up, like you kind of see that British now in second edition really has all the tools.
yes.
It really has the tool like that. Again, that's kind of the design with all factions now, is that all 9 units really provide you with the tools to deal with any problem in the game, even before commanders. That is the goal, that commanders are extra. They allow you to specialize. They allow you to focus on a specific strategy where
Yeah.
really we wanted no faction to say, okay, you want this commander, I have nothing to deal with it. No, we wanted to get past that and say, look, yeah, some factions might be harder than others. Again, this is one in this case. But as you learn British, probably take you a few games. You can learn, hey, listen to this. Hopefully, can help you out. But you kind of get the feel for the different options here, when to go what. And this is just especially true with British. They're kind of very specific when you want to go what. They're not that typical. They're not that easy to play US or Wehrmacht that are a little bit more, just easy, kind of the easy rated factions in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do like the range upgrade on the Churchill. Like the Churchill, like I said, in the first edition wasn't that impressive, and overall the British faction in the first edition, I didn't like them. I liked them the fact that I can go to tier 3 off in the first edition, but they weren't. I like the challenge of trying to win with them, but it didn't feel like what you said now, where you now have in your 3 building boards everything you need to play against any faction and any commander and have an answer for. I like that so much more with the change here for the British. And Brian, do you want to go over the commanders? Do you have time to go over what the idea was of the commanders? I do have them here, or do you want to take a break now? What are your thoughts? Do you want to go over the commander changes? Because, man, I'll tell you what, this was huge changes in the game, what they did with the commanders alone.
Yeah, I mean, we can either do it all the factions and then all the commanders,
Okay.
or we can stick with a specific faction, whatever you want to do. We could probably just stick with faction because that way people maybe
Yep.
you can add timestamps later since this is probably gonna be a longer video
Yep.
that people could probably use as a reference and a strategy guide, if you will, for
Yeah.
learning the game. So
Okay, do we go for opposing faction or do we go with another ally faction? I mean, all factions are opposing. I just want to be clear, guys. But
I mean, we could just stick with the commanders if you want. That way, they're all. I mean, whatever you prefer. If you want to do the factions or if you want to do the commanders, that way there's a British section. I don't know, whatever you prefer. But
yeah, I mean, we can do this. Let's go. Let's go for the commanders, and then I'll cut the video, and then the next faction, and then we can kind of bounce that
oh,
there.
that'd be great. Okay.
Yeah. So now the thing with commanders is, all these commanders, and tell me if I'm wrong, Brian, have been absolutely revamped, redone, starting from their XP costs to now. If you reach tier 4, you can spend. You have the actual experience points you can change for resources. All these changes were just extremely good changes. And I do have the first edition commanders here. It's just a matter of when Brian gives me a commander, trying to find one here quick and putting on the board for you guys to see. So which one do you want to start at, Brian? What are your thoughts?
We could probably just start kind of in the order on TTS here,
Okay,
like left
Royal
to right,
Artillery.
top to bottom, if you will.
Yep, Royal.
And as you're finding that, I can kind of touch on a little bit, expand what Slava was saying there. So the first thing to note is that there was a lot of work into the commanders, and there was a few updates that were particularly big, probably like 3 major revisions. And overall, first was balancing, and then was, so there was just a lot, probably like 5 overall, fairly significant ones, with 3 being really major design philosophy changes. One of them, for instance, you're going to find on every commander in the game has 2 spawns for free. You'll see that in yellow text on every commander. So that was kind of the big philosophy change, is that to help balance them out,
Mm-hmm.
that was one of the big goals, was to really kind of help standardize just how comparatively they were playing, to kind of have more of just a kind of a baseline for what they should be able to do, and how, just overall, just the balance, right? I mean, at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the first thing. And then you already touched on a lot. You also touched on, again, without going too much in the XP system, just to kind of quick note on that, there's a lot more XP. So kind of with that notion, we finding a lot of feedback, especially in 1v1s. 2v2s is actually fine in some ways with first edition, the amount of XP, at least from that
Mm-hmm.
perspective, where now we are seeing that most of the backers are playing, probably 90%, I would say, is probably 1v1s, right? So that's kind of the core experience that we really wanted to focus on and make as best as possible. Not to disregard, team games and everything, but clearly when you get to this level of balance and this level of development, that should probably be our focus, because that's what most games are being played. So not to discredit you and your group, of course,
Woo woo.
but you're going to see commanders in team games that may just be stronger than others, because at the end of the day, the tendency was to focus on that 1v1 experience, because that is the primarily, what we're seeing with the backers, so to try to
Yeah.
keep that in mind for, people coming into this, perhaps like, oh man, this looks really good in team games. It could be. There
Right.
are, especially with, hey, like if I'm playing this faction and you're playing that faction, maybe we can go this combo with that combo.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's to me the fun of the team games, trying to find those kind of synergies and getting the combos, or you focus on that, I focus on this. So now to get into it, on that last little thing, yeah, the 2 XP for one of any resource in the top right of every commander here, yeah, that kind of was when we kind of discussed it, and started to come up with this actually took several months to kind of get it
Mm-hmm.
tuned to where we wanted to with the XP. And then it was kind of like, well, if we error, sometimes you can have rounds, especially compared to first edition, where a lot of early feedback was, man, I'm getting a lot of XP and everything. And I'm like, all
Mm-hmm.
right, well, yeah, the system could have that and encourages that kind of style of getting in there and kind of like you mentioned in your review video again, of just action, getting in there and just fighting it out.
Yes.
And that's what was the encouragement of second edition. So seeing this and understanding this, I kind of this is kind of one of the critical ideas that we came up with, where the 2xp for one of any resource, so that it actually encourages you to complete your commander.
Yes.
Not only that, but then when you do, you still have something to do with XP. So in this odd scenario where, hey, I'm getting a lot of XP, my units aren't really dying, so I have all the upgrades on my units as well. You're still coming in that last. It's usually that last round where the system gives you a little bit of flexibility of, hey, I could trade in my XP for fuel for that last little tank I need going in that last round, or to get the manpower for the infantry, or hey, key munitions upgrade on certain units perhaps. But it gives you that flexibility as a player to go into that last critical round, to really where the game is won and lost a lot of
Yes.
times.
Oh, let me, especially, and I didn't mention this in the review, and I do want to apologize. I'm just gonna mention it lightly now. So when the game ends, if you have the most capture points on the last round, when the final, like if it's a 20 victory points and the team makes a 20, if your team has more victory points than the other team, you actually score a bonus of 3 points. So you could last round come from winning loss to winning loss just by these pushes that Brian's mentioning. And these pushes become so much more viable with that experience, trading experience of resources. It just allows you to do that. So I didn't mention the review, but I do want to mention that was another thing that was great to balance off, coming back games, to be able to come back 5 points behind. It's very possible now.
Yeah, not to go, because this video, we could focus on other
Yep.
videos on that if you want. But yeah, there was a lot of changes. Kind of, we mentioned it on the Company of Heroes board game website, but without really seeing it, I could understand some apprehension there of, hey, like what could have really changed to have such a significant, as their bold claims of how the end game has changed so significantly. But I mean, again, don't want to spend too much time on it, but there was a lot of effort there to make those end games kind of cinematic in a lot of ways, where the last round really can determine in those close games who wins and who loses, who got their
Yes.
unit in the right spot, who made the right purchases, who did the right plays. And that's really what it is now. So there was just a lot more focus on that. There was many changes. Again, too much for this video,
Yep.
but there was many changes that kind of go into that to get it there. It wasn't just one or two. It was like 3, 4, 5, 6 different changes that kind of get it there.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So now going on to this, let me get you back to full screen here. Here we go. The Royal Artillery Regiment. So this one actually, starting out, had a good theme in first edition.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was a lot of these. This is going to be fairly in depth, but this one was one that got to actually had a good theme. It had a decent implementation. But the focus here was to kind of just get it in the right spot, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And the cool thing here is where you immediately start to see kind of a new unit for British, the British armor piercing sniper. So coming from first edition, they didn't have this unit at all. Unfortunately, the infantry models. No, I mean, unfortunately for those maybe who asked this question, but we're not looking at this time to add more infantry models.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I understand there's kind of mixed feedback on the infantry models, to be fair. But going into it, yeah, I wanted to say, look, you can easily identify with dice on the infantry trays what a unit is.
Yes.
So I wanted to lean into that and say, look, you can tell this is a sniper. So why don't we give factions more units without really making the game cost more? So
Absolutely.
So that's kind of what I really try to want to create the most dynamic experience with different units wherever I could, and this is kind of the first one for British.
Yeah, and I
So
want to interject on that. In our game groups, we play 2v2s, 3v3s, 4v4s. I don't think I can remember a single time where somebody was looking at the unit models to decide which unit it is. We're always looking at the unit dice. And this is with second edition. I mean, even new players. Models are nice, but it's the dice. I do agree with you, Brian, there. I like the models, but like I can tell you there's so many Warmark players that have the bazooka guys on with just normal infantry guys, but nobody cares because it's the dice that we look at. And so I get from their standpoint of saying that we like models to match, but I have never had anybody here complain about I want to have a model to match, I mean, this look. It's more like, hey, what dice do I need to put in my tray to signify this unit?
so starting out with that sniper, uh, it really gives you for 3xp a free one. So for British, kind of thinking back to that building board, we don't have to go check it out, but just thinking back to it quickly, it kind of just opens up a different style
Hmm.
where they just didn't have. They didn't, again, they kind of generally lack that damage between their tier 1 and tier 2. Yeah, they have a universal carrier, but that's kind of a big investment, especially in munitions. So it just gives them a different option with this sniper that British just don't have. So a lot of
Hmm.
we're seeing a lot in second edition, people jumping on these commanders, which again, touch on quickly if you're not familiar. In second edition, uh, one quick thing to note on is that you don't have access to all of your commanders in the game. You just randomly draw 3 and pick one.
Hmm.
So that kind of, again, you can't just always pick your favorite. We were seeing that a lot in first edition, but not to harp on that. But now, so you have a choice. So we're seeing a lot of people like these snipers for British because it just gives you a completely different play style very early on.
Hmm.
And then to expand on that, kind of you see the sexton. The sexton is now you don't get one for free.
Correct.
So it kind of so this actually opens up this commander to have a few different play styles. So you can kind of react, and this one's really designed from a kind of a designer standpoint to really combo that sniper with the sexton if you want to go that route and kind of have that heavy tier 2 play of
Hmm.
comboing that to kind of really put pressure on any, especially like fortified, infantry in a building kind of spot, really threaten it and throw out the damage to kind of get that infantry out of there, or to hold, just kind of lock down a key area from
Yeah.
infantry on a board. So that's kind of that combo there. That's kind of again that you think that with Royal Artillery Regiment, again trying to stick with the theme and the concept, and then expanding on. It's got perimeter Overwatch. I think not really. I mean, it just changed from balance perspective, but and moved to tier 3 from 4, and then now sealing it up, it's got that 17 pounder emplacement. So
Hmm.
this commander really has like, okay, you're gonna say, hey, look, it doesn't have that armor piercing option, and then boom, now it has it in tier
Yes.
4. So this commander actually is one of the more versatile. I'd say one of the most versatile commanders in that it can actually stay tier 2, and actually be very competitive between the sexton, sniper, 17 pounder. You kind of see these big damage numbers, unlike most other British units. So if you can kind of find the right combination, unlike most other commanders and playstyles with British, this one actually has that potential to stay tier 2, be very competitive, kind of put that pressure early to mid game, and try to ride that pressure and hold it off for a victory. That's kind of the design goal here.
Yeah, and I love the perimeter watch allowing you to also, I wouldn't say control the map, but I mean, restrict force. If there was a bridge, like a single lane bridge, you just drop that on that, and infantry units, unless they can make it all the way across, are stuck going around or wasting the churn. And that perimeter watch was just such a nice addition. In the first edition, it was just 3 HE damage on one hex. Here, it's uh, you're targeting 3 consecutive hexes and you're doing 2 HE damage to each. It's such a great like map control. Not what do you call it? It's not map control, but it's just like
I actually like to call it area denial. Is kind of the word
yes.
that's how I actually like to call it, because the implementation changed a little bit. It is now you do signal where it's going to be at the beginning of the maneuver phase
Hmm.
for it to trigger in that damage phase. So you do have to plan it out you remember ahead of time. I actually recommend when you see these abilities to set these CP. Kind of don't put them with your other command cubes and kind of leave them aside because I can understand people might forget to use them. But yeah, I mean, set them aside and be ready to use them at the beginning because you have to plan at the very beginning where you're going to set it out. But just kind of area denial. They're not really designed to do that guaranteed
Yep.
damage. It's more about what you said: control that key victory point, make your
Yep.
opponent react. Because
You
this
got
one
it.
real this commander in general is really about controlling the key spots, getting that damage out there that British Corps doesn't really have early game. Typically, they just have normally a different style, where this commander just offers a much different play style other than the standard core.
Yeah, and it's also great for if you have like a machine gun team set up, mortar team, ATs team set up, you can drop on their hexes and now they're forced to move. You know what I mean? And that's what's so nice about permanent Overwatch. I really like that. I'm so happy you guys did that change to it. It's awesome. Area denial, that's the perfect word to use, Brian. And once again, there's a 17 pounder Brian was talking about for the AT. You're saying that's one of the strongest AT emplacements. 4 range, 4 health, defense dice, and 4 anti tank damage from the get go. Super nice. It does come at a cost of 5 manpower, but you guys gotta understand that I don't think that at all is a bad price. You get in the range and you get in the high impact with a defense dice. Love it.
Yeah, the key thing there to note, you kind of touched on it all, but the other thing is that the 17 pounder, the emplacements for British spawn next to your infantry section. Yeah, this counts for your one that your infantry section can do, so you can't get one for free when you unlock it and purchase another one in that same infantry, but still getting that 4 out in the middle of the battlefield, right where you want it. If you plan ahead accordingly, you can kind of plan this out with this commander, get that infantry in that key spot. Boom, it's already in the field, ready to go, right where you want it that first round. So just
Mm-hmm.
a lot of immediate impact.
Yeah. Awesome, awesome sauce. And another best part about it is the sky changed. That's not the same picture anymore. We actually, the guy with the little flag handkerchief thing is no longer there. We got a dude with a beret, well, with a green beret, whatever that is now.
Yeah, there was actually, I know it's funny that you mentioned that, but yeah, so there was, I think this was actually a case of a duplicate. Again, there was a lot of feedback, a lot of time spent in trying to match up portraits when we can with the video game. Some of these commanders are extra that aren't in the, the Company of Heroes 2, for instance. So like there you go, you found it already. So again, just a lot of time on detail trying to, hey, look, is there something else we could find? And where we could, we did change it so to kind of reduce that duplication. So
Yeah. Okay, next commander. What do we got going up next? Royal Artillery. I just noticed that there's two of them. It's the first time I ever noticed that. Royal Arm Corps. Royal Arm Corps. Hey, that's the same guy. Wow, look at that. There he is. So this is the Royal Arms Corps next.
yeah, so this to quickly touch on, this was kind of one of the more controversial first edition commanders. There's just a lot of feedback there with, if you can't quite see it, perhaps in the top left of the first edition, it was 0 XP, and I think you stickered it because of the
Yeah,
errata. It
I
looks
put it
like,
too. Yep, I did
yeah,
that.
yeah, that 0. Unfortunately, it just was it's just clearly a little bit too strong with just getting out those vehicles a little bit too early compared to others in first edition,
Yeah.
and that was just kind of leading to some issues. So this was kind of one of the ones that in some ways it may look similar at first glance, but it actually became more of that was kind of a more niche commander, which was a cool idea. And for a while we stuck with it, but then really trying to balance it out and make it interesting and have its unique spot, it kind of became more standardized, especially when we did the double spawn. That was
Mm-hmm.
kind of when this one changed, for instance. So this is the one that really kind of wanted to specialize in that kind of vehicle, focus, give you that options, those specialty units. Hey, look, I want to be able to mix in my core units with this is kind of that Elite Commander, Firefly and Comet, both
Yes.
options on the same commander. they're very similar at first glance. You'll see that AP damage, but they have significantly different roles on the battlefield. That Comet really is arguably one of the best heavier tanks in the game. It's actually got a speed die for a heavy tank, just really rare.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a phenomenal tank here where it can just kind of charge in, has that 6 health, so it can go toe to toe, get in there, get to where it wants. Kind of like a little bit, you kind of, with the looking back at the building board, the
The church.
Cromwell, just it's kind of like the Cromwell, you know, upgrade. I mean, it's just thematically that's what it was. Kind of sticking with that speed die, getting that 3 AP out of the gate, but it has that more health, so it just has a little bit more of that, getting in the front line, hanging in there, doing the damage.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a little bit different role. So getting a second one out is pretty expensive, but you can kind of see this commander also had some issues with first edition. The costs were a little bit off on this one. I think
Right.
just the attempt was just trying to make this one a little bit unique. So I think there was a little bit of experimentation with the cost there, but just more standardized now. You see the costs. You kind of see the Firefly for the first time here with the unique kind of video game ability. Just that one historical, basically tulip option, just really kind of gives you just a little bit of spice there.
Mm-hmm.
And then just starting out that universal carrier, so you can really kind of have a very unique opening coming out, and your box has 3 universal carriers. So this is kind of that commander. If you want to get all 3 out, you get one for free. You can buy 2 more,
Mm-hmm.
and then just use that. Kind of get out there. It's not really designed again to throw damage out with their flame upgrades, because you're using your munitions for actually units, which is kind of different than a lot of factions where you typically have to spend that manpower and fuel. So it just gives you a different play style, a little concentrated barrage for a little, just a little bit of flexibility there. So, I mean, that's really it with that one. It just kind of gives you a lot of options and
Mm-hmm.
versatility, where, again, British Core doesn't really have that. So just mixing these units with your core units, finding that right combination, trying to take advantage of that and deal with anything your opponent's throwing at you.
Yeah, and what is nice is in the second edition they actually added the tulips, and that wasn't in the first edition. So the 2HE and the Firefly, that wasn't, which is super nice. And when I was playing the British, this is the commander. If I could go with, I'd always go with this one, because in the first edition, I would just run tier 3 into the Comet. That's what I would do every time, and because you get spawn one for free, and once one Comet's on the board, you can pretty much have it. I think on round 3 if you planned it out properly. But yeah, I like that changes. It really balanced it out, and then giving you an option to choose from. It really nice change there. And five for the Comet makes perfect sense. You know what I mean? 5 experience points. It's not that hard to get it too, guys. If you're aggressive.
Yeah, and second, coming from first edition, some returning veteran backers here might be like 5, and again, see that number, say, oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it wasn't 5 for the original commander
Right.
total, but yeah, 5 is a lot easier to get, and it gives you one for free. So you kind of see with these heavier tanks that kind of have that staying power in second edition, they're that 5 XP for when you get one for free.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of that you usually see a unlock as 1, and then boosting it for free if it's a vehicle, it costs 3 more. It's kind of the standard you'll kind of see across the commanders. So there's a lot of math behind the scenes as to trying to balance these costs out, getting everything in a good spot where the cost is there, the numbers are there. Just trying to keep, just that experience that is fun for everyone. That's the goal
Man,
there.
that Firefly looks good. 4 range, 3 anti-tank damage with it HE splash. Woo, that thing is looking good, man. Whew.
It doesn't have HE splash, but yeah, it has the 2 munitions for the 3 HE instead of 3 AP.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So
That's
yeah,
juicy.
Yeah, it gives you that option where,
It's so nice. Versatility, man. Wow.
right, if you really got to put pressure on, for instance, an infantry in a building, normally you don't want to be shooting your 17 pounder, the 3 AP on it. You really want to consider that tulip just to kind of,
Yeah.
get in there. And, infantry buildings, anything like that.
Yeah,
Great option.
and it's nice because that's one thing. I don't want to get too much detail, but in the game, the whole time you're playing, you're asking yourself, do I do a 3HE shot or do I give a permanent upgrade? to, you know what I mean, my Cromwell. You're always trying to juggle which is the best call, which I love about this game. There's no like perfect way. You always feel like you're behind on resources, munitions, especially. It's like, where do I put this munitions to make it be worth its while? Because there's too many good options. Love that changes for Royal Armor Corps, man. I hope you guys are seeing the difference there. Next is Tank Hunter Regiment. Hey, it's right up here. Look at that.
Awesome. Yeah, this was actually another one that was pretty popular in first edition. It had this target treads ability, which was very unique. A lot of that was there was these cool abilities in first edition that just weren't seeing use. They sounded cool on paper, but they were usually just a little bit too niche. This is probably the first one that we're going to run into there, where it sounded cool, but it was like, in actual play, how am I going to get to use this? It was just hard because normally you just want to take out the target instead. So I mean, it could be used. I'm not saying it wasn't it was unusable. Just a lot of these you're going to see that, and that's kind of the first one.
Mm-hmm.
But this kind of just builds off of that core where this is kind of outside of that 17 pounder. This is British's anti-tank option. Like this is
Yeah.
it now. First edition, I mean, this is one that didn't probably change too much. Things got shuffled around. It just found that right spot. But yeah, infantry sections AP damage costs 2 less. So boom, out of the gate, end of round 1, because you get 1 XP for free now. You see this with this 1 XP, that is you can get at the end of round 1.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have 3 infantry sections, boom, 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 all 3 infantry sections all have AP. Just gives you a unique playstyle for British.
Yeah.
Just really anti-vehicle, really fun in team games, But even in 1v1, kind of lets you say, hey, look, I got the solution for any enemy armor. Let me figure out how I'm going to deal with the infantry. Maybe you're tempted like, hey, I could get 3 infantry sections with this tank regiment plus the boys AT rifles.
Yeah.
But then you're gonna be like, man, maybe an MG would be good just to deal with enemy
Correct.
infantry.
Exactly. Which is so nice. You're always stuck. You always have that battle, like which is the best play to go. And so if I'm correct, this game will actually give you the ability to unlock both the munitions upgrades technically for an infantry section by going with this commander.
Right, that's what the boys AT
Yeah.
rifle does. So it gives you that 3 range in sight with the 1 AI, 1 AP. Gives you a bit of flexibility there. Hawker, Typhoon support, anti-tank, just kind of that anti-tank kind of helps solidify the role of this commander, and then the Firefly just icing on the cake to help finish anything off. So This one's just a fan favorite, especially for team games. But even in 1v1s, still very fun and it kind of just really opens up. Hey, now I don't have to go Cromwells or Churchills. I can focus on other units that game. Maybe you go the Centaur. Maybe you go mortar emplacements to mix it with. Just a lot of different options to go.
Yeah.
Commander.
Which is nice. It just opens it up a little bit, because I don't think I've ever seen target treads ever used ever that I can remember playing. Actually, I don't even know if I've ever seen this commander in first edition even played with or against me. Okay. Next, infantry support regiment. Let me see if I can find this guy. People can actually, what do you call it? Oh, I don't think I have that guy. Is that
No. So that's why, if you see me looking around right now, I'm actually trying to open up the Kickstarter page, because this one I believe was already
That's right.
unlocked
I
today.
did see it unlocked.
This
Yes.
is basically one of the new each faction with these stretch goals that I think we're all unlocked now, or if not, hopefully soon. This is that new 6-1 for the British.
Mhm.
So I'm just trying to confirm it, but yeah, I mean, it was, I think, unlocked, so I'm just going to go ahead and just focus on this now. So this one really, what we found is my goal with these new, basically 6 core commanders, is really trying to focus on units that didn't have commanders focused on them across all expansions.
Mm-hmm.
So again, focusing on the core units, because this is a core commander, but again, also things that just weren't covered with any existing commander. So you're going to see a lot more unique abilities here generally, and you're going to find units that just kind of shine that just weren't there in first edition and still aren't there in second edition on other commanders generally. So this one really gives you a much different play style, kind of strengthens that between the 1st and 3rd Infantry Support Regiment,
Mm-hmm.
kind of gets that universal care. A lot of people want that reinforced on the universal carrier. Universal carrier actually doesn't have it. British Corps doesn't have it anymore. But
Yeah.
losing that forward emplacement, that's not in core anymore.
Yeah.
So with that, but it's mostly because British have that higher durability on all their units, so it's kind of a balancing thing. So this one helps focus on that, and then mixed with bolster infantry squads, really kind of gives you the option for weapon teams to really so infantry sections as well, just really give you that sustainability to kind of hold down an area. Gives you that
That's
WASP,
insane. That is so
which is the
strong.
universal carrier for the flame upgrades, and then the veteran Cromwell's like, man, this commander out of the gate just lets you focus on those 5 units, just your infantry,
Yep.
universal carriers, and Cromwell. So if you really those are your favorite units, you draw this commander. Oh my goodness, this is the one for you.
And they'll gain their XP speed dice upgrade and both the AP munitions for free. Wow. Yeah, this is interesting. This is the first time I'm actually seeing this. So I'm actually excited because I was like, man, I don't remember seeing this guy with his helmet. Very, very nice, man. Is there any more? I mean, maybe there might be more infantry. I like that, man. I do like that. And this is interesting because Wasp can now reinforce and have 2 flame. That scares me a little bit because in the 2nd edition, you always, if you have 2 British players, one guy's always gonna have this Wasp out. It's just it's like the infantry killer. It's pretty much 2 guaranteed flame, 2 guaranteed infantry damage, and light vehicle damage, and a possible 3. That's an OKW wipe, and the Warmock are really fearful around this thing when it's upgraded. Super nice, man. What a whoo! That puts fire on people's butt. Assault Infantry Regiment. Assault Infantry Regiment.
So this is one that, if you have the print and play, this is actually in the new Lost Brigades expansion.
Ah, interesting.
So there's actually, so just to be clear, there's basically we're looking to hopefully get 3 commanders for each faction. On the base there's 2, so we're looking for hopefully get some stretch goals later on through the campaign to unlock all 3. So as you kind of go vertical here, you'll kind of see the Assault Infantry Regiment, the Assault Officer Regiment, and the Vanguard Operations Regiment. Currently, we have 2 of these, and then we're going to try to unlock the 3rd with backer support, hopefully. And so essentially, this is trying to focus again on a different unit, kind of a different cool unit that British don't have out of the gate. And for them is the Valentine. So that's kind of the key unit for British in this expansion. It's the implementation here is, it was, historically it was a scout tank, but trying to stick in with the kind of that infantry support. So it was kind of an interesting role historically, and the direction we kind of chose with it is, again, trying to fill in what British didn't have.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of a tier 2 unit, heavy 4 health. This is just, it's kind of a very cool option for British to have. And then you kind of see that specialty. This whole focus of this expansion is focusing on that new assault mechanic when we can.
Yes.
So this one's, yes, it's slow, but this one's kind of like a cheap Churchill. It's kind of the design of it is really just get this really, really early because it's only tier 2. Get it out there, get it to a key spot on the board, rely on its 4 health when people don't really have the armor piercing damage yet.
Right.
And charge it in and get a free defense die. Good against infantry. It's got the 3 range. Flexibility with a little bit of AP damage. Just again, to get a lot of firepower, a lot of health, but you get that, you have that slow. So again, leaning into that British mentality, philosophy, having that high health, having that durability. And then once you combine it with that, kind of what you're showing there in that 3rd one, the infantry tank support, you kind of see this on a few different commanders. It's kind of just a really fun and advanced ability to use if once you get familiar with the game, you kind of get comfortable. Because when you play this style, what you kind of want to do is you see that Thompson SMG's upgrade, essentially the U.S. Thompson's upgrade on the British infantry here.
Yeah, the 2 close quarters.
Oh, yeah. So you start to put this commander together, the first 3 abilities, and this just really opens up a much different, it's just, wow. Like compared to normal British, you can just have the Valentine, the assault infantry, You can get infantry out of anywhere with this, and then you get the 2 defense die when adjacent, so you can assault next to so
Crazy.
your infantry can assault next to that Valentine, even if it's in front of it, because anything adjacent. So even when
Hmm.
assaulting it, the 2 defense die, British infantry sections can get up to that 5 health. So just a very different style for British, is very aggressive.
Hmm.
If you know where to send that Valentine and what you're doing with it, you can just really, control a key spot of the map and push your enemy off of it. So
Yeah,
that's kind of the goal there.
that's crazy because the Valentine's tier 2 building, that's probably one of the strongest, aka tier 2 buildings I can think of right now. 4 health, 3 range, 2 infantry, 1 tank. That's really nice. That's super impressive. It's slow, yes, I get that, but man, if you can get it out, and that's 3 experience points, so you technically could get it out in round 3 if you just engage in one
Yeah.
firefight, 2
Yep. At the
firefights.
end. At the end of round 2, get it out so that you have it round 3, and then just the finisher with the Churchill AVRE. Just really kind of had a little bit of a slight redesign here now with the new splash.
Hmm.
Just a really cool unit now, where with the splash, it says 2. You kind of touched on in your review, but splash kind of makes it play like it has 3 if you have the sight.
Hmm.
So it really is just that new, kind of like just like the video game, just like it was in real life, just that big petard mortar, man, just boom. It just rocks the screen in the game. That's what it does
Yeah.
here. This is just that the bunker busting commander. Just get in there, charge in there, and yeah, it has a little bit more fuel cost, one more fuel cost than the base
Hmm.
Churchill, but it just kind of comes fully upgraded out of the gate, if you will,
Yeah.
as a trade-off, and it's just ready to go. Just a little bit different. Obviously, loses it's got a different turret, obviously, so it loses the AP damage, but that's just the focus of this commander, just really anti-infantry.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you focus on that, and yeah, you could either ignore the enemy tanks or just look for solutions for those. But it kind of just really opens up. Just wow, just very different,
Dude, it looks so
very
good.
unique style,
We
very
had
fun style.
I think we actually had one of our players, because I have the print and play, and we did have it there. I think actually one of the play that, but they only ever went here. I don't think they ever actually went down the whole entire tier. But man, that thing looks fun. This is like my style of gameplay right here. This would fit me right.
Yeah, it is your style to get in there with the British.
Oh man. Okay. Let's go and keep going here with the Royal Engineer Regiment. Let's see what happened here. And guys, I
Yeah,
mean, this is probably the most in-depth view you will get of each faction if you really try to see a change and understand how it plays. Here we go. So that's the first edition there.
I
Um,
think your camera might be a little bit
oh my
off on
bad.
the
Yeah, yeah,
edge.
yeah.
Yep, there you go. Yep.
I actually smacked it. Thank you,
You
Ryan.
might have to zoom out slightly, just slide it backward maybe an inch on your table. A little bit back and to the right. Tiny
Oh,
bit more to the right. You're close.
it's a little
There you
delay
go.
too.
That should be close enough. Yeah, so the key thing here to note, kind of, this one actually didn't change too terribly much. This one actually was one that, oddly enough, is one of my favorite commanders in first edition. Just a lot of fun if you can pull it off. Just really focuses on that smoke ability,
Mm-hmm.
that Avery. This is kind of that core faction card. So again, in the core box, if you have it, you'll have this commander with the update kit, everything ready to go. And just the infantry section changed a little bit. So you kind of see they use that blue dye to just track it, kind of as a
Mm-hmm.
note that hey, it's a little bit different than a regular infantry. Doesn't have an AI damage. Instead has still has that 4 health now. Different than the first edition. First edition, it was kind of closer to the Stern Pioneer first edition, where now it kind of goes a little bit different path in the second edition Stern Pioneer, where it's a little bit more of that close support, a little bit more health. So it's just got that little bit more hey, good for assault type of thing.
Yes.
The assault rules get in there and push someone off a point. Just a cool infantry, and the double wrench to combo with the theme of the commander, especially with emergency war speed, getting that Churchill out. Then you could buy one with this one with the third tier, and then 4th tier, you get a second one for free. That's kind of the design of that, getting out using both of your Churchill AVRE turrets on your Churchill models right out of the
Wow.
core box. This is just a big boom. If you want to see that in action, if you can pull this off and you know what you're doing with British and have a good game plan, this one's a lot of fun.
And just to be correct, the emergency war speed, that is to all vehicles, not just to the Churchill. All vehicles.
Correct.
Wow.
All vehicles. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
We kind of, this one changed a little bit. I think in first edition, I can't quite. It's a little bit blurry, but I think it might have been just heavy vehicles in first edition. Just
Spend 2
kind of.
health to move 2 additional. Yeah, heavy vehicles may spend 2
Yeah.
health to move 2 additional hexes.
So we wanted to, a lot of these things, they were just a little bit too niche, not really seeing use. So we wanted to say, look, this is your commander. We really want you to be able to use this and have fun, right? That's why we're here, to have fun.
Correct.
So we just wanted to get these abilities. Even if it was just a heavy vehicle thing in the video game, we're just trying to get it so that it sees a little bit more use, gives you a little bit more flexibility with your options, and just have fun. Balance, good balance, fun.
Yeah, and what I really
So,
like, if you're watching the commanders, there's no 2 commanders that are like the same. Like it's like, oh, they're just a copycat. You can make an argument maybe the 2 fireflies, but like even the 2 firefly commanders totally different. And that's what I mean. Like commanders will change dynamics of the game. This commander plays totally different than that commander, and their build styles. And one thing I've always done when playing the board game is a lot of times I wait a couple rounds to get my commander, unless I knew for sure off the get-go I want to come running. You know what I mean? Because it really helps me adjust to whatever the enemy's doing, especially if depending on the start or what they bring out. That's what's super nice about this. It's like a balancing mechanic. Unless you're the aggressive player, then you're the one kind of dictating the pacing.
Well, I'm glad you touched on that, because that was actually a conception with first edition. Was there's a lot of people who wanted to wait and react.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, well, I want to use my commander to react to what you're going, because I can pick the commander that counters you.
Yeah.
But again, touching on that design of the second edition, with the core being able to handle anything, if you get the right units to deal with what their commander is, you can kind of use your commander as the aggressor. And if you get familiar with that style and you do like that style of play, you can use it both, really. If you're that defensive player, you can react. If you want to be that aggressor, pick that commander, get the one that has like those flashy abilities early on that commander. Put the pressure on, then rely on your core to adapt to what they're going. Or you can start with your core and rely on your commander. So it just gives you that flexibility. That's kind of the design of second edition, really giving that balance and flexibility to players.
Yeah, and I love it. It's great, man. Going against commanders, if you're watching, you clearly see. Okay, you clearly see, man. Everyone is totally different in so many ways. Commando Regiment. This is a fun one. I actually enjoyed this one a lot because This is one of the few times where your commander or your infantry section can become invisible with 3 range and do damage. It was a really fun one back then, and in the second edition, it's a lot more enjoyable as well.
Yeah, so this one on paper, at a quick glance, it doesn't change too much. I mean, you just, the quick glance, you see it loses smoke raid for forward emplacement.
Mm-hmm.
But this kind of just combos with the forward emplacement. Now that the forward emplacement isn't on the core building board, it kind of needed it, right? Because it kind of needed the stats to show you what you're getting. But it also just really opens up a lot of that forward emplacement options.
Mm-hmm.
If you really like camouflage and you really like British, yeah, this can be a lot of fun. If you like that camouflage play, this is really just opens that up. You get one for free, either infantry section or the Vickers. You have the Staghound option to just come in and deal with some, vehicles to help support against that.
Mm-hmm.
And then that Commando unique ability to just throw a forward emplacement and a infantry.
Any infantry you want.
Any infantry you want, not just an infantry section. It is now, because they have the 3 infantry, pick one that you want. Any visible 2 adjacent hexes, so anything you have vision of, you can combo that with an existing forward emplacement, because that has the foresight. A lot of flexibility here if you put the pieces together. Just very different style than you see with most British commanders. You kind of get that forward spawning, just very fun style.
Yeah, and if you're playing it, that Staghound, it does work. It is amazing with that 3 range. Don't cheap out on a Staghound. It tier 2, it's amazing. It allows you to have a quicker movement for an anti-tank. Love this thing, man. It's little it just annoys
Yeah,
everybody in the map.
yeah,
Love its build.
it's like a poor man's Cromwell. But one thing
Exactly.
with the poor man's Cromwell, but on the flip side, you get it earlier, and you kind of you're gonna start to see this with the tier 2 light vehicles of all the factions. It has 3 range now, up from 2.
Yes.
So it's a small little thing, and the goal with this was we were finding a lot of feedback with those tier 2 light vehicles is that they had good impact when they first hit the board, but because they're light vehicles, they just got blown up very easy. So this kind of gives you, it kind of leans into that speed aspect where,
Mm-hmm.
hey, if you can get in and out, weave in that combat with that light vehicle, kind of like the video game, finding that right angle, getting in and out, hitting your key target. That's what that 3 range simulates. Is it kind of gives you, hey, if I get that right spot, right positioning, right angle, you can take advantage of that if you have a spotter to help, put that damage on that target. So that's kind of the goal with the not only the stag count, but those other tier 2 light vehicles.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many great combos with this commando. I think this is also one of the very, very few moments in time when an MG can become camouflaged with the commando regiment. Because man, it's whew, hard to deal with an MG that's camouflaged because you have to get adjacent to it and walking into it. You're always, unless I mean, if they play it right, you can really get hurt yourself, which is super nice.
Certainly.
Dude, that's a super nice commando, man. I like that one a lot. I'm a big fan. Big fan from the changes there. Okay, special weapons doctrine. Very nice. The guys stay the same. Also, another thing we'll notice, there's like a little anti-infantry, like a little blue guy that's crossed over. They added that in to signify that you can spot camouflaged units. So that's what that sign means there.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Yep.
Yeah. Now, yep. So in this game, snipers don't spot snipers, but just want to let you guys know that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Go ahead. You can
take
start.
it away. Take it away.
Okay. So this one you'll see 3 is again. Well, I guess 2 similarities. This one had its first ability tweaked a little bit. This one actually gains forward emplacement right at the end of round 1. So if you really liked that first edition playstyle of having that forward emplacement, you can just get out there, boom, get some infantry out there at the end of round 1. It's just crazy. It just really opens for British. Normally, you get the forward emplacement in that second command slot now in second edition. So this one really has that early option to get out there, and then combine that with hold the line.
Mm-hmm.
Hold the line just gives you that option, not only for your infantry to, yeah, normally you can build sandbags now for 1 command point, another huge change, impactful change. But this one lets your weapon teams spawning next to that forward emplacement, next to that control point, your MGs, your sniper, because this commander has a sniper, your
Yep.
AT gun, getting defense dice, defending that point, really boosts their survivability, gives them options. And yeah, I mean, it even lets you assault the point with your infantry. So it just gives you that flexibility to just play a lot more aggressive yet
Yeah.
defensive. It's just a very unique play style, very unique, cool ability to hold the line. One of the most unique ones in the game. And then, man, the Operation Crocodile really wanted to focus. This is the first we see the crocodile. And this is where we wanted to focus on. You'll see that it loses slow now. So it
Mm-hmm.
kind of really opens up kind of a versatile, very versatile tank where it's still got the 2 AP, 2 flame, no anti-infantry, but the flame just replaces that.
Which is a
And
better option in my opinion.
so it's got 3, can move 3 because it doesn't have slow. Still has that 3 range, forward facing flame. So, just the turretless flame out of the
Mm-hmm.
front. AP, so it's just a very versatile, really can crush any light vehicle right off the board. Also, it's just very flexible, good into deal with buildings, because it has the flame. Just a very nice, cool vehicle that just plays a little bit different than other Churchills, a little bit more aggressive with it. Use
Mm-hmm.
that health bar. So, you have the first 3 slots, help you with the defense, securing points early, and then kind of that Churchill, or, the crocodile there, Churchill Crocodile, to kind of put that pressure for that late game push.
Yeah.
to try to steal a victory point. I mean, that's really the goal of this one.
Yeah, and if you guys don't remember from first edition, I'll put it up here, is the forward emplacements second edition have even more use other than just healing and repairing. They have +2 sight, so a total of 4 sight, and they can spot camouflage units. In the first edition, oops, I don't know if you can see it there, but in the first edition, it was just a building that was used for reinforcing and healing more than anything. Here, it actually, you got the 2 sight range. You can also spot camo units, which is super nice. But you don't get the repair. You do get the reinforcement, but not the repair.
Are you
So,
able to focus in a little bit on that? And it's a little bit blurry on mine.
yeah,
What was
hold
it?
on one
What was?
second.
Yeah, what was that thing in that bottom left there? It was, I think, just a reminder.
Yeah, reminder. Purple hearts are built by infantry sections on adjacent hexes during the
Yeah,
supply phase.
just using that spot. But the key other thing you touched on a lot, but the new thing kind of there's a lot of text there on the forward emplacement, but just to kind of I've mentioned it, but just to clarify, it can now kind of that second line, second sentence, infantry can spawn adjacent, but with slow the first round. So
Yep.
again, kind of that forward spawning, just really a little bit different than first edition, just giving you that option to get that infantry right out in the middle of the board and a little bit more aggression.
Yeah, and the British did need that because, yeah, that was awesome, man. That forward emplacement, even though it's removed from the core of the building set, it's been so much more processed through it. And just like on the next commander, Hammer Doctrine, again, we see that forward emplacement again coming through, which is very nice. When the British players are playing, I see the forward emplacement used often with commanders, and I don't know if Hammer Doctrine. Let me see if land lease. I don't know if the hammer. Oh, here it is. Hammer Doctrine. Got it. Got it. Boom. Right here. Okay.
Yeah, so this one was another one that kind of went through a bit of a change. The first thing was that English industry was moved from the third slot to the first
Mm-hmm.
because it was kind of the highlight of the commander. What really sets us apart is just a different play style. Got
Yeah.
tweaked a little bit, but the goal is kind of give up your munitions to kind of rush your fuel to get to the later tiers quicker. And then with that forward emplacement, it's not really by default an infantry commander per se, but it gives you that flexibility of kind of securing a location, holding one spot of the board, and
Mm-hmm.
then bringing in your option of, man, the sexton now along with the comet. So like you just get those tools to deal with whatever your opponent's sending at you. So it's just a very flexible commander. Those higher fuel costs, you're able to get more of those even though one spawns are free. It's
Yeah.
like it's kind of that top in terms of the spawns for free. This is very rare. You see 2 vehicles late, but
Wow. Wow.
because the sexton's tier 2, it does follow the new model of where you can have a tier 2 vehicle spawn and a tier 3 vehicle spawn. But kind of at first glance, you're just like you said, wow. You see that 4 and the 5,
Yeah.
get the 2 vehicle spawns, and then you can rush it with the English industry of the tier 1. It just gives you kind of that, man, you're just going to get a lot of vehicles out, and your opponent really, you kind of sacrifice your early game, but if you can get there to that sexton and get there, you're going to have a good, strong late, like very late, late part or the middle to late game. If you can get there, secure the board, save up your fuel, get a lot of cool, ECC vehicles here. That's just a very fun commander.
Yeah, dude, it's crazy because and people, it's not, and it's a strange thing, but it's not just because you have a good commander doesn't mean you can get it, because the battlefield will change so much. 4 experience points is a health for every infantry unit possibly, you know what I mean? Or it's, you know what I mean? It could be, it's juggling where do I spend my experience points is a mini game in itself. It's so fun with that.
Yeah, it's 6 just to get that sexton out, then 11 total to get that comet. If you're
Correct.
spending no experience anywhere else.
Right.
So yeah, you're really kind of giving up that early game if you can just balance it out, find solutions, play defensive, hold spots, hold out, and then kind of do that late game push, really. So
Yeah, it's nice, and people that play it, you do find that mini game, which I really do enjoy. That what's most important now, and what do I want to do, but I have to forget about it because it's just not going to work with what I'm getting. There's another new commander here that is not part of. I have the probably a print and play version of it, but I don't have the first edition because it didn't exist.
Yeah, you might not have grabbed the Lost Brigades because you didn't have the models, perhaps. Maybe like you maybe not either printed them out or didn't worry about them, perhaps because you didn't have the Valentine. So it's understandable.
Well, I mean, for
So
the
this
first edition cards.
yeah, it wasn't the first edition, but maybe if you didn't mind substituting for print and play, some people might have substituted that Valentine or maybe 3D printed or something to test it out,
Mm,
or some people just test on TTS with us, of course. But this one's focuses a little bit different approach than that other Valentine one. I mean, the Valentine again is the key focus of the Lost Brigades for British.
mm-hmm.
But this one is a little bit more of, the other one was more of like punch through as a unison.
I can get it actually. I have it. Hold on a sec.
It's okay. I mean, it's the same copy.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Nice.
So you're not really, you know what I mean? You're not really, the print and play and this are the same. So you have that sniper. End of round 1, you can buy it. So this is a little bit different with that other sniper one. End of round 1, you can get it. So you can kind of rely on that and plan around that. And then heroic charge, you really gain that mobility for the British infantry. And again, you now have 3 core infantry combo with the sniper. So this has 4 infantry options. Heroic charge, just a little bit more mobility for British. And then partner that with the Valentine. So a little bit different than the other Valentine commander, where the other one kind of wants to stick together and punch through as a strong force.
Mm-hmm.
This one's more about kind of spreading out. A little bit different playstyle for British normally, where you rely more on mobility and spreading out. So
Yeah.
you kind of have to rely on that mobility a little bit more with this commander, and then you get the Valentine to put a little pressure on a spot to kind of be your reinforcement, if you will. And then you have that Crocodile to kind of come in again, loses that slow, can kind of come in and have that big impact, 3 range, 3 regular movement, very versatile tank,
Mm-hmm.
very hefty tank as kind of support. So just a little bit more mobile than a lot of other British, especially for like getting 2 heavies out. I mean, yeah, the Valentine's slow, but you can get it mid game, fairly tanky for a mid game tank, even though it's tier 2. So
Right.
you don't have to rush tier 3 to get it. So you can kind of relax if you want to get some mortars, use your fuel elsewhere, use your fuel on universal carriers, and then grab that Valentine, then grab the tier 3 to grab the free Crocodile when you get that 5 XP. So it gives you a little bit of flexibility there to stay in tier 2 a little bit longer. It's a little bit more of an advanced commander, a little bit more aggressive. I know you like your aggressive style.
Yep.
A lot of people love that sniper.
Oh
Testing,
yeah.
So gets that end of round 1. So it's just a really, again, another very different. You don't see anything quite like it with other commanders for British. So
Yeah, and that sniper, that one doesn't spawn for free, so that one you actually have to purchase out if you want it.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
You get it end of round 1 even earlier. Yep.
British Special Service Brigade. Oh
Yeah,
man.
So this one went through a big change. Yeah. So this one was a very cool on paper commander, very fun for first edition, but it just took up so many tier slots just to hyper focus on these commandos.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at it and you read it, and I'm like, oh, now they can become even stronger and very cool, very fun. So it was very fun, but it just kind of stuck you in this one thing, this one specific strategy, and kind of felt like you went all in. So now the biggest change was commandos right out of the gate. You kind of see that they went from 5 manpower, very expensive unit,
Yep.
to a little bit easier to get, the 4-2.
Mm-hmm.
But the key thing is that even I think in first edition they could spawn anywhere. Now it's visible, I think. But yeah, so out of the gate, more close range firepower, so a little bit more damage. So
Yep.
great at taking out enemy weapon teams, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
But just very flexible unit there in terms of just firepower. Again, something British doesn't typically have right out of the gate. And then Staghound, so just a little bit. And this one kind of lets you have some vehicle options. Again, this one's not forced, just an option. Doesn't give it for free, but just 1 XP, just a cheap little option where British don't really have that tier 2 vehicle. Gives them that option. And then Gammon Bombs just kind of combines it for first edition. just a little bit more accurate to the video game there. Just with gamma bombs, not satchel charges, and then gives you camo as well.
Wow.
Gives it that 3 HE, just kind of combines, just kind of gives you that 4 slot a little bit earlier as an option. So it's instead of the regular attack, so it just kind of gives you that anti-building,
Yeah.
cool little option. It can be used against units as well. It doesn't say just building, so it kind of gives you that option and gives you camo. Pretty cool option, but it kind of sticks with their role that they're very close. They get in your face, and they're not, they don't have a lot of health, but you have camo now, so just very flexible unit if you can get
Yeah.
them in the right position.
Because it's funny, because in the first edition, they went the other way. They had the +1 camo, +1 sight and range. They went more sniper route. And here,
Yeah,
they're a lot more close quarters.
well, they with the Thompson, they could get the 2 close range firepower in first edition, but then with the sniper route, it was kind of weird because you wanted to be up close for the damage, but you could spot and hit for 1 AI at that 2 or 3 range.
Yep.
So it was just really hard. Like there were, this versatile unit that didn't really, it wasn't fantastic at range. So it was just an interesting kind of role where now it's a little bit more clear, a little bit more obvious for players picking this commander up and hey, how do I want to use them? A little bit more clear, and then gives you a little bit more options with the Staghound.
Mm-hmm.
And now the veteran Centaurs. So
That thing's crazy.
you just fully upgraded veteran Centaur 1 for free. Like this commander now very versatile with the Stags, kind of gives you that option. But the Centaur's anti-infantry combined with your commandos. Yeah, we really wanted to get the Centaurs on there. We found it, just great spot. Felt it just was a great spot for it on this commander. So just gives you, kind of helps you focus on those core commander, the core boards, what options you have, and kind of just this one just really highlights that Centaur for you. So if you really like, man, I want to see that Centaur in action, and you have this commander, great time to grab it.
Dude, I like that commander. I do like this changes more. So this HE damage was increased by 1. So the HE is actually more powerful. You know what I mean? Not only, but you do have somewhat of some control for anti-tank. I like that, man. That's super nice. Good changes there. Good changes there. Okay, advanced emplacement. Where is this guy at? Advanced emplacement. Right here he is. Boom.
So starting at this one, the theme was kind of spot on.
Mm-hmm.
And the abilities they're just tweaked a little bit easier to use some of these, a little bit more clear in their wording. The goal is really kind of the same thing. You had forward emplacement in first edition, but now you obviously unlock it. So this kind of is the signature, hey, I really want to go that emplacement British style. This one is the one for you.
Yeah, wow.
Very fun. Gives you the defense die option, so you can get because they already have one. All British emplacements start with a defense die, so it gives you that option for 1 munition in a round during the damage phase. So you see that they targeted you, get that second defense die. It just really doubles down. It's really the double down commander on that emplacement option.
Mm-hmm.
Smoke in the tier 3 gives you a mortar emplacement, the only one that kind of gives you a mortar emplacement out of all the British commanders. Then also gives you a 17 pounder. Like if you love British and you love emplacements,
This is the way to go, ain't it?
this is the one, man, for you. Like if you see this one, that's your style. It's a lot of fun here.
Yeah, and those that are just watching, this isn't just for these emplacements. That 1 defense dice is for all emplacements, forward emplacements, even the Bofors and the older more. So that's for all emplacements. That +1 defense dice for the round. You pay the munition cost,
as well as you can smoke any of them of your choice too.
That's
so it's
awesome.
very, very flexible. Go whatever emplacement you want.
That's a pretty that's if you want to play that strategy, that's the way to go. Land lease assault tactics. Land lease assault tactics. Here she is. Boom. Okay, I'm gonna fix the camera. My bad. Bumped it again. Any equipment infantry section. Okay, this was another pretty fun one actually for the first edition because this is where your infantry section get the flame damage, and that was one way to counter the light vehicles from tier 2 in the first edition. So this was pretty interesting. I remember this one in the first edition a lot.
Yeah, this was probably because there wasn't random commanders in first edition. This was
Yep.
just a very high selection rate, 1 XP, very early, very early to see action in first edition. Getting that flame, very powerful, guaranteed that damage for you to get the XP in that system. Just saw a lot of play.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then, yeah, I mean, just not too many changes to the design of this. A little bit more with that assault focus. So again, getting the Thompson SMGs instead of the flame, just a
Yeah.
little more, focused on what that role is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Giving stag still, but gives you the veteran stags late. So again, it kind of helps you that, hey, do I want 3 stag hounds on the board? Am I gonna have the CP for that? Do I want that many late game? It sounds cool on paper, but it was one that it just kind of just a usage issue, if that makes
Yep.
sense.
Yep.
This kind of gives you that flexibility of, hey, now my stags have 3 AP. I can pretty much ignore Cromwell's and then just really use this Thompson infiltration commandos. Just a lot. It is dark outside, yes, Persephone. So yeah, it just gives you that infantry section focus, yet with the stag. So it just kind of gives you that bread and butter. If you like that mobility for British,
Mm-hmm.
you don't really get out of emplacements. This kind of gives it to you, and it's very mobile, right? So it doesn't like the Valentine isn't mobile, but the stag's a little bit more mobile. So it
Right.
just gives you that kind of aggressive spawning forward option, spawning next to an empty standard building with the infiltration commandos.
Yeah, and in the first edition, the XP was hard to get XP unless you were playing aggressive. So like the double stag hounds, that'd be so late in the game that you'd get it. You wouldn't get it because it was just doing 2 tank damage for a light vehicle. And at that point, people are getting more into the heavy tanks. And that's why Brian Matt is like, why get the 2 unless you're pushing for that 100% to get. And then that's what a lot of people did. They used this to push that as hard as they could just to control the map. So that's why it's really popular. But late game, this commander really falls apart late game in the first edition. And here it seems like mid to later game that 1 AP damage on the stag hound, giving it 3 AP damage at range of 3 now instead of 2. You can still, annoy all tanks.
Well,
Cause.
also, yep, sorry to interrupt, but another quick little note there with that. I don't know, there's no actual model restriction in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the 3 stags, and you could always fill in if you want. We don't have any rules saying, look, you only have so many models you can't fill in. You can actually use other things to substitute. But with the 3 stags, with this commander, it also opens that option. If you do want 3 stag hounds, use all of your models. You can get that one for free, you know, at tier 2, grab a second one there, and then get that third for free late game.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of opens up that thing where you kind of in this as a designer, you kind of see this spot where, oh, if I won for free, and then I don't really want to buy one because I'm gonna get 2 more for free at the end, and then a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people I understand don't really want to substitute, because they're just playing this thematic game, and I want to use what I have. So you kind of run into this weird, it's just maybe just me, but maybe some other people have it as well, where hey, I don't want to substitute, I just want to focus on what I have, and this one's about stags and infantry sections is the focus of this commander. So it kind
Yeah.
of just gives you that flexibility of, hey, I really do want to use that third stag. I don't want to substitute because I really want to use my models. So it kind of just gives you that flexibility to just play the game, naturally and as you want to, rather than have this weird restriction.
Yeah. And I do like that. I think the new stag hounds, even the design of that one range was all it took to give them so much more play on the board early on. It's awesome. And the last, these 3 are sneak peeks. So I don't even know if Brian, you can be showing these, but here is the Vanguard Operations Regiment. I don't have any first edition for it.
Right, this is a new one in Lost Brigades. Yep. So this one kind of fills that gap between the other 2 options with the Valentine, where this is that final forward emplacement, gives you that 17 pounder. So it's kind of a little bit with the emplacement focus.
Mm-hmm.
Splashes in that Valentine there. So you get the Valentine to kind of push through mid game. You get that 17 pounder late game. You get the Royal Engineers for repairing. So like the Valentine has that 4 health. The 17 pounder, has that 4 health as well. So it kind of gives you that option of, lean into that repair, kind of get an area, secure it, fortify it, use that Valentine to push. Just a little bit different variation of the other styles with getting that forward emplacement where I don't think the other ones, the other Lost Brigades don't.
Yeah. And that is the overview of all the commanders, guys. This is, I mean, if you want to look at the British, I mean, the last commander card, but this is universal. And we'll talk about this in a later video. But I mean, if you wanted to see what changed for the British, I mean, that's as in depth as we can get. We will talk about the Lost Brigades, I think, in a whole nother section, just because it's something that, you know, I mean, has its own place. But yeah, this is the British. And I mean, it took us almost 2 hours just to go through all the changes. And that's just to talk through the changes. That's not even how much time and energy, you know, the team has spent updating this stuff. I can remember many times going back and forth in arguments about things of, you know, I mean, the one point, the huge argument I had was, hey, why did you remove the British being able to jump to tier 3? But now, you know, I mean, the final stages, I'm seeing it makes sense. It makes sense for thematics, it makes sense for game, and it makes sense for the feel. And so, if it takes 2 hours just to explain the changes, imagine the amount of time that the team spent behind the scenes actually balancing, fine tuning, and all the playtesting data they're reviewing. And Brian, I really appreciate you sitting on this one. Do you have anything else to say about the British? And then I think maybe some other time we'll sit down, go to another faction and another faction, go in depth, just to see what people want. And I will touch it up, edit this video a little bit. You know what I mean? So I'll release like a more crunched in version where we'll get away from a lot of the, you know, the banter talk that we've been enjoying.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah, no, I mean that really touches up the British, and great. Wanted to just thank you again for taking the time to go through. And yeah, I mean, British, I think, was a great one to start with. A lot of it was based on, to be fair, your experience was feedback that we received with the British. And I mean, I felt it myself, got a lot of feedback on it. And it was one that we wanted to not only see more use, but people to actually want to play and have fun and
yes,
really enjoy it. And the fun was hidden underneath the covers, but now we just really wanted to get it out there a little bit more accessible. Yeah, again, still the most hard, the most difficult to play at the end of the day, but just a lot easier to kind of learn the game. You can just pick it if
right,
that's your style. You like that defensive style, this is the faction for you. If you're looking for that, that's kind of the theme of the faction that
yeah,
other factions just don't really offer out of the gate. Like they could maybe, OKW is probably close to this style in a lot of ways. Both of them get emplacements, but this one is really that kind of very defensive, very getting out there, holding a spot,
yeah,
keep your guys alive, and then you're just going to be able to overwhelm your opponent with your positioning, your smart play, your planning. That's really the British way, and
yep.
hopefully players can enjoy it more.
Yeah. And guys, thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it. And when we get a moment, we'll see if we can get another one up. But once again, Brian, thank you for your time. And everybody that watched, hopefully helps you guys out a little bit. And you guys have a great night.
Hopefully see you next time. Have a good night.